This is a joint hearing between the council and the planning commission. I'm just going to have to shout. This thing is on the fritz. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Duncan.
Here.
Fritz. Here. Baker.
Here.
Morales. Here. Mayor Underhill.
Here. Planning commission roll call.
Commissioner Wilson. Here. Commissioner Kelly.
Here.
Commissioner London.
Here.
Commissioner Hogan.
Here.
Chairman O'Brien.
Here. Okay, thanks to everyone for coming tonight. So there are 3 hearings tonight. First one is regarding the RETA cycle that we're going through. We have another one scheduled for 7 o'clock. We'll adjourn from the first one and then begin the second one at 7 o'clock. That agenda is back there at the entry. And then we'll adjourn from the special session, and then we will start the third session, the third regular session, third session of the night. So at this time, we're going to open it up for public comment for items not on the agenda. This time is reserved for those in the audience who wish to address the council on subjects that are not on the agenda. The audience should be aware that the council may not discuss details or vote on any non-agenda items. The mayor has the discretion to limit time to 3 minutes. Your comments or concerns may refer to staff or placed on the next agenda. Is there any public comment? Okay, seeing and hearing none. Let's start with the workshop. We have representatives from SACOG here and HCD.
Correct.
Mary Beth?
I will introduce your presenters for you. We have from SACOG, Sacramento Area Council of Governments, we have Greg Chu, who is a senior planner. He serves as the housing team manager and the project manager for the regional housing needs allocation process. Seated next to him is Doug Caden. He's an associate planner from SACOG and specializes in regional land use planning and housing issues and works on the regional housing needs allocation process and the Metropolitan Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategy. And last is Melinda Coy. She's a senior policy specialist at the California Housing and Community Development Department. She works on the housing element compliance with local governments and has been the town of Loomis's reviewer for the past 2 housing element cycles. I turn it over to Greg. Thank you.
Welcome, Greg.
Great, thank you for having us tonight. I really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to come out to Loomis. I see a lot of amazing things going on, so it's good to see the progress that's happening. So tonight, we're here to talk about what's called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Process. At SACOG, we serve, for those of you that aren't familiar, we serve the 6-county Sacramento region. That's Placer and El Dorado counties, Sacramento and Yolo, Yuba and Sutter counties. There's 22 cities and 6 counties that we serve. We're the Metropolitan Transportation Organization's federal designation to manage state and federal funds, and we work with the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency coordination with Placer County. But one of the things that we also do, required by state law, is to work on what's called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Process. But before we get into that, or before I get into that, just talking generally, we've been going around the region talking with communities and working on what they want to talk about as it relates to quality of life and livability and so forth. And housing has been probably the hottest topic for the last few years now. And we kind of want to just give a little overview of kind of what the state is seeing and how it leads to the RENA process. So this is just a graph that the state puts out. It shows how much development is going on as far as housing statewide, it's kind of a tiered, and it goes up and down, and kind of you can follow the economy kind of with this. The more production there is, the better the economy has been, and so forth. But to keep up with demand in the state, on average, we need about 180,000 units statewide a year. And this goes all the way back to 1954. Things were really good after the Second World War, and then we've had our ups and downs over the years. But particularly since the 90s, California has really fallen behind compared to where we are in terms of growth and demand. And a lot of this is just natural demand from birth rates, as well as people moving here for economic reasons. So the bottom line on this graph here is we need about 180,000 units, and if we were to draw a line across that, we're short. The state is short by about 3.5 million units of housing, according to the state of California. That's more than the other 49 states put together as far as disparity between the number of housing units and the demand for those units. And there's a number of reasons why, but the state is trying and has been trying since the 70s to get a better, closer match between housing production and housing supply. So part of the reason that the state is behind is we've had a affinity towards single-family housing, which there's always a demand for single-family housing, but at the exclusion of providing different alternatives to housing types. So we've here in this region alone, we know the data really well on this. 93% of residential housing is meant for single family, is zoned for single family. So we don't have the ability to offer things that are considered more affordable, such as duplexes, fourplexes, and apartments, whether or not they're garden apartments or cottage apartments or bigger types of units. So that's where the state comes in. This is a phenomena statewide, is communities just haven't been zoning enough land for multifamily options, or at least just different options out there besides single-family housing. And single-family housing is the most expensive, as a general rule, in the planning world. So why do we care about housing in the state and in our region and in individual communities? Well, affordability has a lot to do with economic prosperity. If we have opportunities for younger families to come in, to make their name, to develop their careers, they're going to need opportunities for affordable housing, and housing for all different ranges of incomes and life stages. We also have climate and economic climate goals that we're trying to meet. If we have different types, a variety of types of housing, we can offer closer housing towards places where there's transit service and walkability, and then areas that are farther away, people who want more privacy, or then they're willing to make the trade-off on the transportation and land use. And then there's also fair housing and equity. We have statewide, we have about 41% of our households are considered low or very low income. And to meet all different economic incomes, we need to be able to provide a different set of housing products. So we're here tonight to talk about what's called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Process. It's a state law that's been in place since the 70s. Basically, it's a state law that it seeks to ensure zoning for all different economic segments of the California population. And basically it applies to what we do in individual communities as well as this region, is we need to all consider ways of offering different housing. So with that, I'm going to introduce Dov Caden from the SACOG staff. He's going to talk about specifically RHNA and what it means to the town of Loomis.
Thank you, Greg. Welcome, Dov.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, so my name is Dov Caden. I'm going to be focusing today more on the mechanics of how RHNA works, what SACOG's role is in that process. So as you can see on the screen here, RHNA works in cycles across 3 different scales of government. And the first phase is that the state will provide every region across the state with what's called a regional determination, which is the total number of units that the region needs to plan for. And then regions like SACOG are responsible for developing a RHNA methodology for then distributing that determination to all of the cities and counties throughout the region, or towns. And then finally, local governments are then responsible for adopting a housing element that demonstrates, among other things, how you can accommodate that RHNA number through your zoning. And it's done through the housing element, which is one of the elements of every jurisdiction's general plan. And the state will actually review your housing element for compliance. It's the only element for which that is the case. So it's sort of a unique planning process. We also have, as Greg mentioned, Melinda Coy here from HCD to talk a little bit more about that last step. She can kind of provide some more context for that. But I'm going to focus on now on how the SACOG distributes the number on that bottom step. So there's two main parts of the methodology. We need to figure out the total number of units that each jurisdiction is going to plan for, and then we also need to divide that number up into 4 different income categories. So you'll have units in each of those income categories. So the total RHNA calculation is based on each jurisdiction's proportion of growth in the long-range plan that SACOG produces. It's called the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, or the MTP. And this plan has a land use forecast, that focuses growth towards infill communities, towards where the jobs are, and it's really about trying to figure out a way to plan for our region in a way that'll reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. So RHNA has to be consistent with this land use forecast that's in state law. So we base our total RHNA number, so Loomis's total RHNA number is based on your proportion of growth in that. So for Loomis, it's 0.23% is the amount of growth that you have of the SACOG region, which means that Loomis is going to get 0.23% of the regional RHNA determination that we get from the state, which this cycle is higher than in past cycles, and I can provide any more context on that if you have questions. So this is actually less than what Loomis would get if we just distributed the numbers based on a per capita basis. If we just said, okay, for your share of population right now in the region, you get that much RHNA, Loomis would actually get a higher number if that was the case. But because it is based on the MTP growth and it is sort of an infill focused growth distribution, it is 0.23%. And then the biggest step in the RHNA methodology, and the one that gets a lot of attention, is then we further divide each jurisdiction's total RHNA into the 4 different income categories. So the income categories are very low, low, moderate, and above moderate, which are each based on buckets. Basically, they're based on percentages of area median income. So for example, the moderate income category is 80 to 120% of area median income, households that make that. And area is defined at the county level. So for Loomis, it would be Placer County. And for this step, jurisdictions are typically most interested in the very low and the low categories, which together constitute what we typically call the lower income categories or the affordable categories. And this is because when you show how you can accommodate your RHNA number in the sites inventory of your housing element, the lower income categories have to be accommodated on higher density sites. And this is based on an assumption that is really laced throughout housing element and RHNA law, that generally speaking, denser housing types are more affordable. Now, we know that's not always true, right? It's a necessary, not sufficient condition, but it does generally hold up that affordable housing is multifamily housing. And it makes sense, right? You can make more efficient use of the space, of the land. The typical units are much smaller in a multifamily building than a sort of large lot single family home. So generally that does hold up. Okay, so your above moderate income numbers that you get for RHNA, those can be accommodated on single family zone sites. That's not a number that in our region we typically have a hard time hitting. We have a lot of single family zoning and capacity in our region. So that's typically not as much of an issue. But the lower income units, the state is looking for again, those higher density zone sites. And in Loomis, the default density standard is around 20 units an acre. So how do we go about assigning the number of lower income units to each jurisdiction? Well, there's 5 RHNA objectives that are laid out in state law that we are required by the statute to further as a part of the methodology. And those first 2, increasing mix of housing types and then promoting infill equity in the environment, those are key tenets of our long-range plan. We think about those quite a bit as we are preparing the MTP. And so that means that we're actually already furthering those objectives just by doing your total RHNA calculation, because again, that's based on our MTP growth. But the last 3 are, at least in part, not directly furthered by the MTP. So jobs, housing, balance, these are the ones in red. So jobs, housing, balance, which now requires us to think about not just total jobs, total housing units, but also the relationship between low-wage jobs and units that are affordable to those low-wage workers. Regional income parity, which is this idea that over time we should be seeking to move jurisdictions towards a similar number of lower income households, right? Let's try not to perpetuate these sort of spatial inequalities that we see throughout the region. And then finally, a brand new objective. This is affirmatively furthering fair housing, AFFH. It's kind of a mouthful. But this is really about overcoming past patterns of segregation, really trying to open up areas of high opportunity so that everyone, regardless of your income, can kind of take advantage of those. So since the MTP doesn't explicitly cover those ideas, we've developed a RHNA methodology over the last year or so with all of our jurisdictions being a part of that conversation. And it includes 3 adjustment factors to further those 3 objectives that we don't think that we have furthered already. So each jurisdiction would start with the same proportion of lower income households, lower income units. So 40% is the average that we get from the state for the entire region. So everyone starts at around 40%. And then we would increase or decrease that proportion based on 3 adjustment factors, 1 for each of the objectives that we need to further. And then at the end of the day, you'd add up all 3 of those adjustments and settle on an adjusted number of lower income units. It's important to keep in mind here that this is really not changing the total number of units that you're being asked to plan for. It's just changing the proportion of those units that are lower income. So I'd be happy to go into more detail if there are any questions about how each of these works. It can get as complicated as you want to get.
Why don't we pause there, just bring it back to council for questions, and then
Sure.
restart planning session and council.
Yeah.
Okay. So I know it's a lot to take in. I've sat in about one of these in the last year, so I don't have any questions this time. Planning commission, council, questions, comments?
I just think that once we actually see the numbers and you walk us through, it's probably going to be a lot easier to sort of understand each one of them.
Sure.
Just give us some thumbnail of what AFFH adjustment factor is looking at. Just generally, what are we talking about?
Sure. Yeah. So high opportunity. What does that even mean, right? So really, what that's trying to get at is there are places that you hear this term like the determinants of social health, and basically we're looking at places that if you were to raise a child, they have a really good chance of thriving, right? So we're talking about places that have great places like Loomis that have great schools, great access to amenities, right? The great sort of job access, low pollution burden, and sort of we take all of these individual metrics, we bundle them together. Actually, the state does this, and we use this metric called the opportunity maps that were developed at the state level as a part of the low-income housing tax credit program. And it basically gives every census tract across the state an index score of how high opportunity are you. And so if you're above a certain threshold, you're considered high opportunity. And so that's how we, with the housing planners across the region, decided to interpret that.
So how does that then affect if it's a not very good place to live? What does that do to the number that you need?
Yeah.
Compared to a good place to live?
Yeah. So I encourage you to look at the draft RENA methodology menu because it can get very much in the weeds, but I'll try to sum it up. Basically, we're looking at the percentage of your existing housing units that fall within high opportunity areas, and then we're comparing that against the regional average for that same percentage. If you're really high above the regional average, you're going to get a bigger upward adjustment of lower income units.
Any other questions, comments from Planning Commission or Council at this time? We will have public comment after Dov's presentation, so.
Yeah, well, so maybe I'll just give you the upshot of what this means for Loomis. You're getting, as a part of the methodology, the way it's constructed, Loomis is getting an upward adjustment of lower income units for each one of these 3 adjustment factors. And that's because Loomis is, 1, relatively wealthy. Number 2, it's very high opportunity for the reasons that we just discussed. And then it has, number 3, lots of low-wage jobs, and then not very many places for those low-wage workers to live affordably. And so that ratio, as a part of the jobs housing fit adjustment factor, is also increasing. So the story, the RENA story for Loomis is that you have a lower overall number, but you have a higher than average proportion of lower income units, if that makes sense, because of these adjustment factors.
There were now required what you mean?
Well, so yeah, and Melinda will get more into this, but yeah, every jurisdiction across California is required to zone for these units. Yeah. So, any other questions before I?
Any other comments, questions? Let's remember to talk in these microphones also, please, because I think questions that we're asking are some of the questions that some people in the audience and the public have. So I'll try my best.
I have one. You spoke just a little bit ago about access to jobs and things like that, access to transit, things like that. So we have according to the numbers, we have a higher proportion of low income, yet we have very little transit for them to be able to move about to jobs, because that was one thing we talked about was greenhouse gases. So our major job centers are Lincoln, Rockland, Roseville, which aren't right around the corner, but they're not that far away. So how is that determination made as far as the services go to help these individuals?
Yeah, and you're kind of hitting on one of the really difficult parts of RENA, which is we have all of these competing objectives, and sometimes they are aligned and sometimes they are not. And so I think the greenhouse gas portion of this, and I kind of hinted at this earlier, is that the greenhouse gas portion is actually meaning a lower overall number for Loomis, because there are places in the region where you have a lower greenhouse gas sort of footprint from transportation, right? But these other factors are driving the lower income percentage up. So sort of the AFFH idea, right? And then you were mentioning the jobs housing fit idea. And so I'll just quickly go over the jobs housing fit, because I think that was mainly your question. So that is looking at the sort of it gives every jurisdiction across the region a ratio, and it's a ratio of the number of low-wage workers to the number of units that are affordable to those low-wage workers. So Loomis has a high ratio, meaning, again, what low-wage workers you have in Loomis, there's very little places for them to live affordably. And so as a result of that high ratio, you're getting Loomis is getting an upward adjustment of lower income units to try to hopefully in the future plan for more affordable housing so that they're able to live in the community that they work.
Yeah, so kind of, I could maybe summarize in a nutshell to point us in the right direction. You're going to come up with the numbers of how many units we're going to need in each category, and our task will be to identify where we're going to put these units. You know, how many acres we need and where we want to put them in our camp.
You nailed it. That's it.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding, earlier you said the metropolitan transportation. Is there, when we build affordable housing, is there assistance from the state for transportation projects? I mean, one of the things we've been told before is we don't have enough money to build infrastructure. So if we have housing built, how are these people going to get around?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so as Mayor Underco knows, so SACOG develops this Metropolitan Transportation Plan that basically creates a land use and transportation scenario in the future they're married, they're coupled, right? So we are basically saying, okay, here's where we think the region can grow in a way that'll reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and achieve all of these quality of life sort of metrics. And then we create a list of transportation investments that will support that land use scenario, if that makes sense. And so that's kind of the start for how the transportation funds then get divvied out. So the intention is, yes, you will have a portfolio of transportation investments that will support whatever sort of growth pattern that we're planning for.
Recall a few months ago we brought the MTP, we had MTP, SCS presentation from SACOG, and exactly what Don's saying. Loomis and Placer County Transportation Agency identify projects around the county that will hopefully reduce sprawl and keep traffic and movement condensed. And so those two projects are married in a certain way. They're supposed to complement each other.
Yeah, and I would just note one other thing that, and this has been sort of I think a fair critique of the RENA process in the past is that, okay, so there are these unfunded mandates, right, and then there's not a lot of money to help support it. That is changing, and this governor has outlined quite a bit of money to try to help with this process, both at the sort of housing planning stage, but then also with sort of the infrastructure improvements that would be needed to help support that. So in this last budget that was signed this summer, and actually Melinda would know the number, but it's a very large number for infill infrastructure grants to help support affordable housing. It's like 500 million or something.
Yeah, it's 500 million, 250 of which are for planning grants, 250 of which are for the infill infrastructure.
Yeah, so the point being, just there's a lot of resources now out there to try to back up these sort of requirements.
So the state treasurer was in Loomis last week, and she mentioned that Placer County was one of the few counties that she actually wasn't in charge of some of that funding to be able to distribute it to, that we had some kind of independent entity. And I really wasn't able to follow up, and I wasn't sure if it was like the way PCTPA is with transportation.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Hi. So the $500 million that we're talking about for the planning grants and for the infill infrastructure grants are administered by HCD, not by the Treasurer's Office. So the $250 million for planning grants are actually specifically designated to help local governments meet their sixth cycle housing element in RENA, and we are and it's on a quick timeline, so we are planning on getting a NOFA out by early to 2020 to be able to have all local governments have access to this money. The $250 million infill infrastructure grant program, that is through an existing HCD program that's tying housing and infrastructure together, and that's a competitive program that is administered through our Department of Financial Assistance, and we should be having, again, some sort of notice of funding availability out shortly on that as well. So we got some quick turnarounds from this governor, so it's been pretty exciting. But yeah, so there's a lot of planning money. It makes my planning heart go.
All right, any other comments, questions for council, planning commission? For now?
Okay, so the draft RENA methodology menu is out for comment right now. In that menu, you'll see 4 different options that are shown on the screen here. We have to further all of the RENA objectives, that it's in statute, so we don't really have a choice about it. The difference in the menu options is not, whether we apply one of those or not. It's just how are we emphasizing or prioritizing each of those adjustment factors. I'm not going to spend much time on this because for Loomis, frankly, there's not a massive swing in lower income units between the 4 options. I think the highest and lowest is 10 units apart. But I would be happy to answer any questions if you have them about what these options are and how they were created. In terms of the schedule, we're currently in public and HCD review phase, I guess, for the methodology menu. We have a public hearing coming up on Halloween. I'm looking forward to seeing the mayor's costume at our board meeting. And then our earliest that the board would adopt a single methodology would be in November. That is the soonest adoption date. We do have an appeal process that can happen afterwards. So if a jurisdiction wants to appeal its allocation once the board has adopted, they can do that. But those appeals do need to be settled by next summer, and we have a hard deadline for the RENA plan just to solidify all of that. And then Loomis would then have until August of 2021, potentially slightly sooner than that, depending on when we adopt our MTP, to adopt your housing element and get it certified by the state. Again, the big picture sort of requirement here for Loomis is that you have to demonstrate that you have zoned enough capacity, housing capacity at different densities to accommodate your RENA number. And as with most jurisdictions across the state, you're likely going to need to look at rezoning some parcels as a part of that process. You are not alone in that. The RENA numbers are higher across the state. The vast majority of jurisdictions are going through this same thing with you. So Melinda is going to talk a little bit more about that part of the process now. So maybe we can answer, if you have additional questions after Melinda's done, we can have more of a discussion.
Okay, great. Good job. Welcome, Melinda.
Hello, Council. Thank you, and Planning Commission. Thank you so much for having me here. It's great to actually be out into the communities that I work with. Like we said, this is my 3rd cycle coming up with the town of Loomis, and I've been a native Sacramentan for my entire life, so I'm very familiar with all of this area. So I want to talk to you a little bit about changes in housing element law, what the housing element means, and some big things to think about as we're moving through this next cycle. Oops, is this? Oh, there we go. All right, so we covered a little bit of this, but I want to get into a little bit more detail about our role at the state in terms of reviewing and approving housing elements. So we plug into this local planning process in several different ways. Like Greg said at the beginning, and Dov said, we develop the RENA methodology for the region. We also have a new mandate. The past 3 years have been very busy for us in new legislation that has basically tasked us with a lot of new things. One of those new things is to look at that methodology that Dov was talking about and to ensure that that methodology does in fact further those objectives of RENA. This is a new piece of our responsibility. In the past, we didn't have any say in that particular piece of the RENA puzzle. We were just mostly at that regional level, but now we have kind of an oversight authority around making sure that the methodology meets those requirements. The second piece that we come into is helping local governments meet their housing element requirements and by providing technical assistance, now planning money, which is great, and really outlining the rules and guidelines around how do you do the housing element. One thing I like to talk about is that the housing element is not just about the zoning and meeting the RENA, though that gets a lot of attention, but it's also about your current needs. It's about your programs. It's actually the only piece of the general plan that really has to have a, hit the ground running type programs where you have actual objectives that you're trying to meet, and that you're trying to meet within a certain very kind of short time frame of 8 years. So it is a great opportunity to actually have a conversation with the community too about, what are they seeing as far as their housing needs, and not just also new housing needs, but existing housing needs, if there's rehabilitation needed, things like that. So then we also have a review authority here. So part of the process is that once you come up with your plan or your strategy in which to meet the statutory requirements of housing element law, then you send us that draft and we review it and we work with you to make sure that that draft does meet the statutory requirements. Then you go and adopt it, and then we review it again to make sure, again, that the adopted meets those statutory requirements, and then we can find you in compliance. So basically, you get a letter that says your housing element meets the statutory requirements of housing element law. That opens up a lot of different things, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute here, but one of those things is that there's a lot of funding now that is kind of either conditioned on it or is some sort of like points criteria, but really, there's a lot of effort at the state level to tie housing elements and the planning, basically what's in the city's control to do, with access to new funding and to funding sources. The one thing I want to just remind folks is that the housing element is a planning document. The requirement is to zone for, to accommodate, to facilitate new development to occur. The city itself does not have to build those housing, though there are triggers in other pieces of law that says if you are not building enough housing in your city, there are some developer incentives like streamlined housing development, by right housing development that will trigger if things are not actually achieving the goals that are set in the housing element report.
Can you elaborate on that
Yeah.
a little bit? So when you say triggering, what do you mean by that? So in the event that let's back up.
Yeah.
I think it's clear that we can zone all we want for
Yeah.
housing, but government does not build housing.
Exactly.
And so in the event that the market doesn't or can't or
Right.
chooses not to build housing, you talked about a trigger. What do you mean by trigger?
So really, right now, the biggest one is SB 35, though there may be some, you never know with future legislation what's going to end up happening. But what that means is there's a variety of reasons why housing doesn't happen, right? One of those things could be that there may be some impediments at the city level, something's not working right, and development is not being approved, things like that. So that could be one of the reasons. It could be, it could be lack of labor, there's a variety of different reasons for that to happen. The intent is not to penalize cities that are not actually building because of the market is not doing it. It's to say, hey, if the development is not happening, we're going to come in with some sort of extra development incentive to make it easier for development to occur. So like by right housing, which basically means that if a developer comes in and it meets the zoning that the city has in place, the rules around what the development should look like, your development standards, your general plan standards, then it can bypass any kind of discretionary action. So there'd be no vote from the council saying yes, you can build this, or no, you can't. They would automatically get the opportunity to build that housing because it meets all of the city set standards.
And so there would not be a public hearing process, or like a project when you come to council, or it would be
Right.
done at an administrative level?
It could be done at an administrative level. Sometimes it could be done where you have some sort of public oversight, where you do allow for some sort of public, opportunity to hear about the project, but you can't actually make a decision that would constitute some sort of discretionary decision-making. It'd only be on the merits of the project as it relates to the objective standards that are set forth in your zoning. And I would say that that is something that's a really big thing across the state right now. Folks are really looking at, and some of this planning money that's available is really meant to do that. It's not just this, but there's also a lot of other new laws right now in place where objective zoning standards is kind of becoming the rule of the land. So many jurisdictions we're seeing right now are going through their codes and looking and seeing whether or not they actually have objective standards, or whether or not it has language like, it fits in with the neighborhood character, or without some sort of definition of what that actually means. So basically some sort of not some sort of discretionary, or where somebody has to actually opine on whether or not this meets the standard or not. So 30-foot setbacks, or 30-foot height limits, or those are the things where they're concrete standards. So that's one thing we're also encouraging. We actually have a technical assistance program that's available on our website, and we actually have roving planners through some of our planning money. Again, we're trying to help jurisdictions kind of change the way that they're looking at the way that their codes are, to make sure that they are objective and so that they can meet these new housing laws.
I might just add
Yeah.
just a quick thing. So SB 35
Right.
is its own animal, and that's about whether or not you're actually building
Right.
the housing. But the funding eligibility, some of the legal risk and potential
gonna
legal
talk-
action from the state is all about housing element compliance, which is only about the zoning, which
Right.
you control.
And I'm going to talk about that here in 2 seconds. But, so just to give you, because, you're not all steeped in this as much as I am every day, just to give you a really high-level reminder of what's in a housing element, and to talk a little bit about some of those changes from last time to this time. So there's basically 3 major analytical components of a housing element. Your housing needs section, which is your demographic section. That's where you're talking about your special needs populations, your housing stock conditions, and basically what's actually happening in Loomis itself. The second piece is what is the available land, and that is that piece, that zoning piece we're talking about, where you take your RENA and you go and you put it through a series of filters that are outlined in the statute to make a determination of, do I have enough sites to meet the need? There are some big changes in this section. This is since last time to this time, major changes. One of those changes is that if you are relying on sites you used last time around, and you want to use them again this time around because they haven't been developed on, they now have to be by right. So again, remember what I was talking about, no discretionary action, no CUP, PUD, nothing. It has to be basically allowed for a developer to come in, and if they meet the standards, pull their building permits and move forward.
So I want to stay on that
Yeah.
for just a second, because we have a property that is in our downtown behind commercial core.
Yeah.
As you get off Rayleigh's, and we identified that last arena cycle for low-income
Right.
properties. So you're saying that we cannot use that again? We can't apply?
You only can do that if you allow for it to be by right, which is no CUP, PUD, or any other discretionary action that triggers CEQA in any way. So design review is allowed as long as it's objective. So that means no deliberation on your design review. That means saying, again, that goes back to looking at your standards that are in place. Are they guidelines, these are what we think it should generally look like, or is it actual specific objectives? And so if it's just the objectives, that's what they would be able to follow, the objective standards. So that's something to keep in mind.
And is there time to be able to get those standards in place if they're not already?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about 2021.
Okay.
So, and we got lots of money available right now, so.
So if somebody came in now to build on that site, we still would have our usual.
Well, that's something that, so that site right now is actually by right. So, but there's not the same kind of conditions. There's a new condition, and I'll talk about it here, I think it's the next slide, here, that says that now 20%, in order for it to be by right, there's actually an inclusionary requirement on it, that 20% of those units have to be affordable to lower income in order for the developer to develop it. But right now, that site is by right, without that 20% requirement. So if a developer came in right now, met all of the zoning standards and everything else, yes, they can use the by right component of housing element law to develop that particular parcel.
Councilwoman Clark-Kretz, please.
I have a question about the planning money that you spoke of. That was the $250 million?
Yes.
And so I know Loomis is 0.23% of our housing. Is that relative to how much money we might be able to get?
So the way that we're still in development of the program, but the way that it is assigned is that every local government is going to have access to some portion of it. It's going to be dependent on the population size. And so that'll be the NOFA on how much your city is entitled to.
And then you said that's going to happen fairly immediately.
Yeah.
Versus perhaps a town or a city that may not like something, and so it sort of is overlapping the...
Right. It overlaps, so the idea is that this money is being made available to help cities prepare for this cycle, do some of the things that we were just talking about, like look at your zoning codes, do any rezonings that you're going to need to do, hire a consultant to help you write your housing element, a variety of things. I will say this is unprecedented. I have, in my entire career, I've done housing elements. I've never seen planning money available like this before. So I would say this is kind of like a once in a blue moon type of thing from the state, so take advantage of it. This is not the only planning money also that's available to you. Senate Bill 2 from 3 years ago, which is the fee for real estate transaction fee, permanent source, also has planning money. And every city is entitled to a certain piece of that planning money. So Loomis has money out there that's sitting on the table waiting for you to come in and use.
Thank you, Melinda. So looking at the time, I want to continue with your presentation. And I want to ask council, legal counsel, can we push the 7 o'clock a few minutes ahead without interrupting anything? Because I want to leave enough time for public comment and questions.
Right.
Okay. So unless there's objection.
No, I just want to make sure we cover that slide that was missed.
Okay, and then we're going to come back to, Don's going to finish up on a few items, methodology items in your presentation that we didn't get to.
I think I got through everything.
There's a few other things.
Yeah, you actually missed the numbers part.
Yeah, so let's come back to that after Melinda.
Okay.
And if everybody would just save your questions and comments until after the presentations, we'll bring you up and we'll get going on that.
All right.
Okay, Melinda.
So just to kind of walk you through what it means to have a suitable site, so do the zoning. There's basically 3 questions you're being asked. One is, do the sites have appropriate zoning? So this is the thing that we were talking about, where the proxy the statute uses for affordability is density, and your default density is 20 dwelling units per acre. So that means that you need to have sufficient sites to accommodate that lower income need at that 20 dwelling units per acre, at that multifamily. Then it needs to be also suitable and available. So does that mean that it means it has to have, infrastructure available to it? Can't be like out in the middle of nowhere. It has to be large enough to actually accommodate a housing project. And then you kind of do the numbers, then how much housing can we actually realistically accommodate on that? And that's a really important key, because there's something that's been in law, but it's been very specified now, called no net loss. No net loss says that you need to have sufficient sites available throughout the entire planning period to accommodate whatever remaining housing need is. Because over 8 years, things will get built, your need will shrink, but you will have to make sure that you have enough sites to accommodate whatever's remaining, and this is by income. So if a site that you've identified, say, I have a great site for multifamily, and we say we can accommodate about 50 units on that site. And then the developer comes in, or somebody says, hey, maybe we should do less than 50. You have to make up that difference than what you actually said in your housing element. And this law is today. So it's active today. And if you said, hey, this site that we said could accommodate our lower income, and a developer comes in and says, we're going to do a market rate, you still have to approve the development. You can't use this law to deny the development, but you have to now rezone something else to make up for it. So that's the no net loss framework. Hot off the presses, we just finished our technical assistance memo. We're going to send out an announcement about it on Thursday, but it's available on our website. So the legal risks for compliance. So there's several things that you should be really aware of. One is that because it's part of your general plan, it affects the validity of your general plan if you do not have a housing element in compliance. On the reverse, there's actual statutory language that says, hey, if you got substantial compliance from HCD, you're given by the court's presumption of validity if somebody challenges or brings a case against you. So they say, basically the court says, hey, if HCD says it's good, then it's good. Also, not just for housing element compliance, but housing element compliance is one of them. In fact, right now we have a case against Huntington Beach in this way. But also for a variety of other, like if you deny a project and you shouldn't have, there's some laws around that. It's the next slide. But we can refer that matter, we'll send a notice of violation, and then we can refer that matter to the AG's office, and the AG's office will bring it up and bring lawsuits. Also, it could trigger court-ordered sanctions. That budget bill Dov was talking about also put in monetary kind of sanctions against cities if we do bring a court case forward. Also, you could lose your, lose your power to actually approve projects. Permits in any way, shape, or form. They can appoint some sort of person to actually act as the person who approves things for you until you get everything right. There's a whole host of sanctions that the court can trigger. But also, there's also access to funding. So there are a variety of planning grants, and then SB2, we were talking about SB2. Now, the housing element for Loomis is in compliance right now, which is great. You have access to the planning grants. But every year, every local government gets a piece of the SB2 money on an ongoing basis after this year one part. If you do not have a housing element in compliance, you do not have access to that money. So it's required to have access. Also, the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities program, also some housing programs require housing element compliance. The CDBG, the non-entitlement CDBG program requires housing elements. So there's a variety of other kinds of funding that is tied to housing element compliance. So the other areas I was talking about where HCD may notify the Attorney General is violations of the Housing Accountability Act. This is the law that says there are very limited circumstances in which you can actually deny a housing project, especially if it's for lower income. It's even harder for lower income. And the 65863 there, which means nothing to anybody but me, is the no net loss provisions. Density bonus law is another section that if you do not allow for a density bonus on a project, which you're allowed to have pursuant to the statute, that could be another area where we could refer to the AG's office, and also any violations to fair housing law. And I think that's what I have, and I know that you had some questions for Dov on the other thing too.
Okay, comments, questions from Fort Melinda Council, Planning Commission? Microphone, please.
This page, could you just briefly explain what number 5 is?
Yeah. So this is the weedy part. So there's a variety of different ways in which you do your housing. You can do sites on exclusively residential, which means 100%, you can 100% multifamily, or you can do things that are like allows for mixed uses, so commercial and residential together. This piece of the by right statute, or the by right requirement, says that at least 50% of whatever your shortfall is, if you kind of come into this case, has to be on exclusively residential sites. There is an allowance for you to do up to 100% of that shortfall if you require that on that all the sites that you identify there, that it has to have housing.
Comments, questions? Okay, stay close because public comments coming next.
Okay.
Okay, so if you would, just pick up from this page.
Yeah, and I apologize. I think it didn't make it into the actual PowerPoint, but you have it. Yeah, I think it was supposed to be there, but it's in your packet. Yeah. Apologies for the audience, but you have it in your packet. And basically what it is it's just a sort of overview slide of how the number gets derived for Loomis. I mentioned before, your total number is based on your proportion of MTP growth. So 0.23% multiplied by our determination means that in Loomis, you're looking at a total number of about 352 units. And then the slide that you have is showing the adjustment factors under the staff recommended option C. As I mentioned, the other options are going to be very similar to this. You're seeing upward adjustments in all 3 of the adjustment factors. So, 5 extra units for regional income parity, 20 extra units for AFFH, 20 extra units for jobs, housing, fit. So those are being added to your average sort of, if you started at 40%, which would be 143 of those total units, right? You add those adjustments, you're looking at 188 lower income units. It's representing a little over 50% of Loomis's units.
So is that low income and very low income?
Combined, yes, lower, yeah, affordable, yeah. And the reason why they are typically combined is because when you're showing it in your site's inventory, they're treated the same in terms of density. So basically you have to, 20 units an acre, that threshold is for both very low and low combined. Yeah. Okay.
Is there a definition of units per acre? There's net acreage, there's gross acreage.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah.
So that comes into your capacity calculation when you're trying to figure out how many units can go on that acreage. You start with you start with the gross acreage, and then you net out things such as infrastructure, required improvements to the site, any kind of environmental issues, things like that, to come up with what is the actual capacity. The 20 units per acre is basically what's in your zoning code or in your general plan, and I believe that's probably on gross acreage. I'm not entirely sure what's in your...
Not here.
Not here. Is it net acreage? So it's whatever's in your plan there.
Okay. Then there are other factors that come into that, like setbacks, allowable lot coverage, So you might be zoned for a certain number of units per acre, but it may not be realistically achieved.
Correct.
And that's okay. That's okay?
And that's okay.
Good.
Okay, any other comments, questions from council of HCD or SACOG? Seeing and hearing none, we're going to open it up for public comment. Anyone from the public wishing to address the council, please come up, questions or comments, and then we will direct staff, in this case HCD or SACOG, to address your questions and comments. And for everybody who just arrived for something other than this item, we are going to adjourn this meeting after we close public comment and close questions, and then start the regular meeting schedule, okay? Hi.
Do you need to give my name and address too?
Yes, please. For the record.
Eva Marshall, 3367 Kathy Way in Loomis. Something I didn't quite understand is in the by right. Okay, so if you have a property that's a by right, you're saying a developer can come in, and even if we have it designed as affordable housing, he doesn't have to comply with that if he chooses market rate? I don't understand how those requirements are being put on us, on the town, but the developer doesn't have to comply with what the town is saying. That, to me, is a conflict. So is there any way you can expand on that? Thank you.
Thank you.
So really, it comes down to, we do not zone for affordability. You zone for use and type. And so what this is saying is that, except for the new requirements that have that 20% inclusionary on it, is that, again, the proxy the statute uses is the affordability, or for affordability is the density. So if a developer comes in at that density, they get that benefit of the by right zoning if you have to do that. What no net law says is that you can't deny a project just because it's not affordable, but what you're required to do. But there are provisions where you can have that developer help you do this too, is find another site to upzone for residential.
Let me just add for anyone in the audience, affordable housing is not a generic term, it's actually a technical term.
Right.
It's often applied towards subsidized housing, either by sale or by rent. And so it's calculated by income level, not just, quote, what's affordable, because that's affordable is a kind of generic way to describe price. Inclusionary housing, can you define inclusionary housing?
Inclusionary housing is something where, as part of the zoning, a part of basically the rules of development, there is a requirement that a certain percentage of those units that are being developed is affordable with the affordable that we were just talking about, where there's some sort of deed restriction or some sort of covenant on that property that says that many units has to be affordable to a certain income range or certain income band. And affordable in this case means 30% of a person's income is paid towards the rent is affordable. That's the level.
Got it. Thank you. Okay.
No, Bruce.
Good evening. My name is Doug Tatara. I live at 5990 Barton Road. I have three things I'd like to say. A week or so ago, I attended the City of Rockland Council meeting, and I heard the director of SACOG give a similar presentation. And just for perspective, the number they had over there was 5,600 units over the next 8 years. 3,000 of those would be low, and 2,600 would be moderate. And that's on 200 identified sites, 200 acres. So do the math, that's like about 30 units to the acre. Okay, so I don't think you have that problem here. There's more land available here. The second thing is Senate Bill 13 is currently on the governor's desk, and that's the accessory dwelling unit legislation. I believe that since no action has been taken so far, that on October 21st, the 30-day period is up, and it'll be a pocket signing. Accessory dwelling units can be another factor in addressing this need for affordable housing. Okay, there's a lot of ranches here in Loomis that they could put another 1,000-square-foot building in the back. Third point, last point is the town of Loomis owns the Heritage Oaks property subdivision. I think it's 24 lots or something. That might be a great place to rezone for this purpose.
Thank you, Doug. Other public comment?
Roger Smith, 6755 Wells Avenue. I kind of got excited about the prospect of grant money being available. Not that Loomis needs any money for anything, but whenever you hear grant money to the tune of $500 million total, two pots. One was for planning, one was maybe with more on the construction end. But can you give an example of how the town, what the town might, how they might be able to get a money for a planning grant? Can you give an example? Then I had one other comment. Go ahead.
That comes through SACOG, is that right?
No, through HCD.
Through the state.
Through the state.
Goes straight to the jurisdictions?
Yeah, and those, so SB2 planning grants are non-competitive dollars, meaning they have allocated enough money for every jurisdiction across the state should they have a project. SB2 planning grants, the initial round of applications are actually due next month. And I believe Loomis, we've been working with the staff here to identify a project on that. But yeah, so that's one pot of money, and then there's a similar non-discretionary pot of money through the governor's budget that will also be for similar things. As Melinda mentioned, free money from the state for housing planning does not come around very often, and we very much recommend you take advantage of it.
But would that take the form of the town being able to hire another planner or take on more help, or how would the town justify getting money?
Yeah, so the nexus has to be to accelerating the production of housing, and in particular affordable housing. So ADUs were mentioned before, accessory dwelling units. So you can use the money to hire a consultant to update your ADU ordinance to better facilitate those types of housing products. That's one thing. Another very popular thing, objective design standards were mentioned, that you can hire somebody to update your design standards and work with the town to facilitate that. Another very popular thing I'll just mention is because of all of the rezonings that we're expecting across the state, you can actually use SB2 planning grants to do those zonings for free, because if you're already going to have to do it already, you may as well do it for free. So,
good. That's good information. Thank you. On the other front, about the other $250 million pot that is available, as municipalities are urged and required to do more housing, and in this case, lower income, high density housing. High density means more traffic, right? High density apartments, high density, they're all dwellings, they're dwelling units with one or more cars. So as you go to high density, you're putting a blip on your projected traffic numbers for the future. In that pot of $250 million, would there also be money available for the town for infrastructure improvements, widening of roads, maybe new access onto Interstate 80, those kind of projects, to help accommodate the traffic that surely will come?
I'm not as familiar with the infrastructure.
yeah, and frankly, I'm not an expert either, but it is basically intended to be money that when you have higher density affordable development, you can apply in tandem with the application for the project to basically fund infrastructure that helps support that. So a lot of times you have situations where the higher density requires like sewer improvements and things like that that can be very expensive and can represent a huge barrier to that project being built. This is intended to help sort of ease and mitigate against that. I would just mention what's interesting, and I work on the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, so we do some of the modeling for what's the impact of different growth patterns. And what you actually find, interestingly, is that if you can locate, if you can be sort of smart about where housing is located and what types of housing we actually see, you can actually see a reduction in traffic. And that's exactly what we do. The reduction of greenhouse gas emissions that I was referencing before happens because we are locating growth in more efficient places so that you have other ways of getting around, and then when you do go to work and when you do go out to dinner, it's a shorter distance. So just mention that.
Thank you. Public comments.
Jesse Lunsford, 6133 Smokewood Court. I think the mayor lightly touched on it. We took 6.6 acres of jobs, general commercial. We transferred it to residential. We gave the developer residential land, we gave them high density, and we gave them went from 2-story to 3-story. We gave him all these things, and he built he called for no affordable housing. In that scenario, all we're going to end up is pockets of high density all around town where the developers are not even required to put in any affordable housing. And even in your future graph of if it is your 20%, you're talking we'd have to build over 1,000 housing units just to make our numbers of affordable housing. And that's just over a small 7-year period. Then we're up for new numbers after that. It seems like you don't have any teeth behind forcing developers. When the town bends over backwards, we gave them what they wanted. Their land value went through the roof, and the town got nothing in return. And I don't see an end to it. As we allocate more and more land, and we take it away from general commercial, we take away the jobs, we give it to residential, and we're gaining nothing in return. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm not sure that's a question. So it's clear that, is it true that we can't require affordable housing unless we have an inclusionary requirement? And Loomis does not have an inclusionary housing requirement yet. But can't be mandated without. Okay.
William Quinville Sr., 6280 Horseshoe Bar Road. First, I'd like to thank the presenters for coming. Lots of information. Is that presentation available on the town website?
Here's a recommendation thanks for pointing out. I was going to make a recommendation that we have on our website a Marina link, because there's going to be a lot more of this coming down for the next few months, next couple of years. And so I'd like to be able to have the public go to a place on the website and find all the frequently asked questions and these presentations. So that's in the works, quite well.
That's good. Information is good. I would like to say that intrusion into local government by the state and not having any control over what goes on, I find very disturbing. Because then we will be I think there was a meeting recently where we determined we had 640 housing spaces here in the Loomis. So if we have to put up 1,000, how do we do that? We build a skyscraper somewhere? That's the problem. The last meeting, we had a meeting a while back, and we determined that our plan out was 640 homes. So, yeah, if none of those people are required to put in affordable housing, then what happens to us? Just inquiring mind.
Yeah, so we cannot create an environment where developers cannot fulfill the affordable housing requirement. All right.
So what do we do when we run out of our 640 houses and we have no more space to put that affordable housing?
Well, we have to zone for it, and if we don't have the width, then we have to go on, and we can't restrict that from happening. in essence.
Thank you. And that's why I support the state of Jefferson.
It's not on the agenda tonight, is it? All right, any more public comment?
Miguel Yukovich, 5911 Craig Court, Loomis, California. I wasn't going to say anything until the last comment where he said there's nothing the town can do, and I guess the question I have is, since the town owns the property on Walnut, is there a way that when you sell it, it can be a requirement that it be, and I don't like to use the word low, moderate income housing, you know, $300,000, $400,000 homes where people that make $60,000 or $70,000 or $80,000 could afford it. Is that a possibility? Can you put that in as a provision for the sale?
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Hi, my name is Sue Dobies, 5570 Arcadia. I think that Jeff had asked if there was going to be any financial assistance to help with all of this. And I wondered, what incentive will the developers have to build moderate or low-income housing?
So that's where there's a couple different things you can do to incentivize for you to get developers to do what you want to do and build the affordable housing. One is to make sure that they know that they can take advantage of builder incentives right now, like state density bonus law, which really provide a lot of incentives for that additional affordability. They have to provide that affordability to get that. Another thing you can do is you can do something called like an affordable housing overlay, where you can have certain densities that are available only if they provide a certain amount of affordability, you know, or some other incentive if they provide the affordability. So basically, you can have a suite of incentives to facilitate and to kind of guide the market, because it's, you know, building is a market-driven thing, to do what you want it to do.
Thank you.
With the lower income affordable housing, is there going to be any state or local subsidization if even the people in that bracket cannot afford the house, if there are no jobs available, if there's no transit available? Let's say they don't have a car and they need to get around. Is there going to be any money for the residents or subsidizing of the housing?
So on that, there's a couple things. One is, you know, I want to go back to something that Dov said about this methodology, especially as it relates to the lower income, is that right now there is more lower income jobs here in Loomis than there are housing units for those people who are working here in Loomis. In terms of some rental subsidies, there are some programs available through the Sacramento SHRA, Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency, such as housing choice vouchers. There's a lot of subsidy that's going to be made available for developers to come in and actually build the specific subsidized housing that has the covenants that say you have to, you know, this is what you can afford, or this is what you can charge, and there's specific laws related to that. So, you know, when it comes to affordable housing in Sacramento, a lot of it really is generated through multifamily housing developments and nonprofits who actually build these things and then record covenants and deed restrictions to ensure that they remain affordable to those income groups.
Okay, thank you.
One more comment.
Okay, one more. Getting some good exercise over there.
I just want to say that I agree with Bill Quenville that it's disturbing to me that our local control about where we live and our houses and ways of life really are being determined by another authority. It's disturbing.
Sonia Coupler, 5630 Tudor Way, Loomis. I'm just curious, if a municipality is found not to be in compliance, what is the process? Do they get sued and then they lose their local control? And the other question I have is, what constitutes a cycle? Is that 8 years? From what I can tell, it is.
That's an easy one, it's 8 years, yeah. And then, you want to touch on the consequence?
So on the consequences, so if you lose your compliance, then then we can, the AG will sue. The thing is it's not just us at the state level. Also, there's a lot of third parties out there, such as Legal Services of Northern California, a lot of watchdog groups that also have the power to bring a lawsuit against the city for having an invalid general plan, specifically because the housing element is not in compliance. And then that goes through the court process, and then that's when those sanctions come into play.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, seeing here now, we'll bring it back to council. Comments, questions? Okay, well, it is clear that the state is taking a very aggressive approach at getting housing online. I like the idea of having local control. That is one of the most important things and tools that local government has. So when we have an opportunity, let's keep it in-house rather than having someone else from the state tell us what to do. That's my recommendation for this. And at this point, we are going to adjourn this meeting and take a break for 2 minutes. Thank you, HCD, and say bye. I'm not sure what's going on with the microphone here. Okay, let's get going here. Council, let's get back in our chairs. Okay, we're going to call the meeting to order. For everyone in the audience, this is a special meeting, and agendas are in the front there. And then we are going to get through this single item, and then we're going to adjourn and then start the regular session. So with that said, roll call, please.
Okay, council members Duncan. Here. Quackretz. Here. Baker. Here. Morales.
Here.
Mayor Underhill.
Here. Okay. We will have public comment on this item after the presentation and council has questions or comments. Let's take it away. Item 1, authorization to enter into legal service contract with Remy Moose Manley LLP for secret representation on Costco. Sean?
Yeah, I'll make this really quick. Because of the conflict that the town attorney's office has with any potential litigation on Costco, we needed to find alternative representation for the town in the event that there is some sort of a secret litigation on Costco. So we worked to find a firm, reputable firm. Remy Moose Manley was brought to our attention by our town attorney's office. It's a very highly regarded firm up and down the state. They do all kinds of secret work, not only on the public but private side. The managing partner, Jim Moose, actually wrote the book, like literally wrote a book about for CEQA compliance. So staff is strongly recommending that you approve this legal services agreement so we can get them under contract.
Okay. Comments, question, council? Okay, let's open it up for public comment. Public comment. Seeing and hearing none. Bring it back to council. We have a motion. Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Noes? Abstains? Okay, item passes. We are going to adjourn this meeting. Stay in your seats.
No breaks.
Okay, let's call the meeting to order. This is the regular session meeting of the Loomis Town Council. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Duncan.
Here.
Quackretz.
Here.
Baker.
Here.
Morales.
Here.
Mayor Underhill.
Here. Okay, at this time, we're going to open it up for matters of interest to items not on the agenda to council members.
I have something. Now, I've had several questions from the public recently regarding our general plan update and what is going on with it, the process we're following. And I'd like to, in the interest of transparency, see an agenda item on next month's meeting that outlines the process we're following. I would like it to be as specific as possible. And I know we just started, but maybe a rundown of how we are going to treat each element and make sure everyone understands what we're doing and how the public will be able to participate and have input in the process. So I'd like to see that on the next agenda.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll put that on. Thanks.
Great. Jan?
It came to my attention from another citizen that we actually had some folks from Loomis go out of their way to clean up our rest stop. And I just wanted to thank them. And their names are Shannon, Ernest, Denise, Reinhardt, Lambert, Randy, Zanino, and Juliet Delta. And I would like to see perhaps the town do something special for these folks and appreciate what they did on their own time.
So we have the Citizen of the Month plaque that we do in the back. We haven't done those for a little while. We can certainly do that and bring it back for the next meeting. I just need to get the list and hopefully figure out a way to contact them to get them to come. So we can do that.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll keep going this way. I'd like to piggyback on Councilmember Duncan's thoughts about process and mirror that with the RENA process. I would like to get something on the website that shows timeline, and if Mary Beth could give us a rundown of what to expect over the next 18 months with our housing element and the RENA process at our next council meeting, that would be appreciated. And let's get a link online so that we can start loading everything up in the respect and interest of transparency. Councilmember Duncan, Baker, Morales, you're good? Okay, excellent. Town manager report.
I got just two quick things. First one I wanted to talk about, I'm sure people have seen the PG&E stuff and the public safety power shutoff event. So that is scheduled potentially for starting tomorrow at I think 4 a.m. Although I've also heard that it could start tonight sometime after, well, I guess tomorrow after midnight, so 12:01 or whatever. We've been working with the Sheriff's Department. I've been in conversation with the Sheriff's Department and with the Fire District to make sure that both of them obviously know what's going on. The town itself, the one thing that I would tell residents is that if there is a power shut off, our traffic lights are not going to work for very long. They're on a battery, but that battery doesn't last very long. If you see an intersection that's normally got a traffic light there and it's not working, you have to treat it as a four-way stop. So make sure to stop, look, and then go to make sure you're not getting any kind of an accident. You can go onto the PG&E website to get updates on where everything's at. That website's been crashing all day long because everybody else is going onto that website to see where everything's at. But every once in a while you can squeak through and see where things are. It's been a little bit confusing because I checked this morning to see the town hall address that showed as not being impacted, and then I checked the Del Oro address and that showed as being impacted, and it stayed that way for most of the day. But then if you look at the map, it's like all of Loomis is impacted. So I frankly don't know if you're going to have power or not tomorrow. Yeah. So fill up your bathtub with water so you can flush your toilet if you need to. Keep your refrigerator shut, all that stuff. The PG&E website does have some stuff on there on best practices. Frankly, I would suggest that you go somewhere else, though, because that website is still being hammered by so many people that the likelihood of you getting in is going to be pretty slim. I have the manager report on the back, and council got a copy of this as well. So there's kind of a lot of stuff in there, but the only other thing I wanted to talk about was I've reached out to the county to talk to the county's meeting about the town taking ownership of the library property. And so far that meeting hasn't been set up, but I'm continuing to reach out to try to get that meeting set up, at least to start the conversation. So that's moving forward. And then I wanted to recognize, each month I'm trying to do recognition for our town employees who are celebrating an anniversary with the town. And so this month, October, our planning director, Mary Beth Van Voorhis, has been here for a year on the 15th. So thank you.
All right.
Make sure to look at the thing on the back for the rest of it.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Loomis Chamber update. Oh, come on. Eggplant Festival. I held all my comments so that you could give us an update and all kinds of good stuff.
Before Jenny goes, I forgot to mention this too. Sarah at the library, Sarah Comstock, our librarian, can you talk about the Chromebook thing really quickly? I forgot to put this in, and I told her that I was going to ask her, and I forgot to ask her again.
It's all right. So the library actually received a grant from the state library for 12 Chromebooks that we'll be receiving, plus a charging station. And those Chromebooks are actually going to come preloaded with mental health resources. So they'll be available for public use and within the library. But we can also, as the library, use them for other things as well. So it sort of opens up a lot of doors for us. So we're very excited to get them. No idea when we're going to get them, but hopefully soon.
Excellent. Okay. Jenny.
Hi. Good
Eggplant
evening.
report.
Eggplant report. I was actually just going to sit down and say, we had beautiful weather, so that was very helpful. And I think we really got a good turnout of people from our town and from out of our town. So I think our business has really got a good exposure with it, and I'm happy. Just for the chamber part, we do have a business walk planned for the end of the month, and that's about it.
Well, thank you. Taylor Road is a great place to have the Eggplant Festival, in my opinion. It really opens everything up in a lot of ways, and it was fun to do that. So thanks to all the organizers and all the people who made that happen, all the vendors. It was a great day. Thank you. Okay, let's move on. We're going to open up for public comment for items not on the agenda. This time is reserved for those in the audience who wish to address the council on subjects that are not on the agenda. The audience should be aware that the council may not discuss details or vote on non-agenda items. Your concerns may be referred to staff or placed on the next available agenda. Public comment. We're going to limit public comment to 3 minutes.
Oh, I can talk faster than that. Joanne Legomari, 3708 Suter Lane. I'm here because I'm concerned about how long it's taken for the library building to be brought up to the county. And when I've talked to some members, they said, well, if you're concerned about that, come and tell us. So I'm very concerned. Is there anything I can do as a citizen to the county that says move it? Because it's really important. We need to be really proud of our library. And one of the things we need is more room for teens, and there's no room for it now. And there's no sense of adding it if we don't own the building.
Right. I would recommend emailing your county supervisor to express your concerns.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Jim Holmes, supervisor.
I knew that.
Jim Holmes.
Roger Smith, 6755 Wells Avenue. First of all, I want to thank the town for the recent restriping of Wells Avenue. That was accidents waiting to happen, and it looks very nice. I understand 2 other major roads in Loomis were restriped, so that's great. Glad to see that, especially with wet weather coming. I also would second what Councilman Duncan and the mayor mentioned about transparency in the general plan update process. This is a huge event for any town when a general plan gets updated. It doesn't happen frequently, so it's a biggie. Some of you probably know I spend part of my year out of state in another city. That city happens to be updating its what they call its comprehensive plan, same thing as a general plan, which they haven't done in 16 years. There, in the interest of transparency, they did form a citizens advisory committee. They're doing surveys. They hired a consultant to guide the process. Big event. So those are some things that may be beyond Loomis's ability to do, but there are municipalities that put a lot of money and time and effort and transparency into the general plan update. So thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
William Quenville, 6280 Horseshoe Bar Road. There's been a serious uptick in property crimes, especially theft, within the Loomis area. And if you go on any of the Facebook pages or next door, you can see them almost every day. The other problem is that I've complained about this before, not to beat a dead horse, but traffic on Horseshoe Bar is out of control. It is a 2-lane freeway. And I used to be able in 2015 to sit out on my patio and enjoy an iced tea, and now all I hear is it's not just certain times of the day like it used to be. At 12:30 at night when I walked my dog the other day, there was traffic on that road flying down the road. And how to slow it down, I don't know. But somebody's going to get killed. It really is getting that bad. And a lot of it's because the county has built out around us and they're just using it as a shortcut to the freeway. So I don't know how to fix that, but I'm going to start expressing my concerns to the county because they don't bother to do an environmental impact report when they add this stuff and put all the strain on a Horseshoe Bar. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing and hearing none, we'll bring it back to council. Move on to adoption of the agenda.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Noes, abstains, agenda is adopted. We're going to move on to the consent calendar. This is an opportunity to comment on the consent calendar. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on the consent calendar can do so now.
Can you pull number 6, please?
Okay, we're going to pull number 6. Any other public comment on the consent calendar? The consent agenda. Okay, seeing and hearing none.
Move approval 1 through 5, 7 through 10.
Second. Okay, motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Noes, abstains. Consent agenda is passed with the exception of item 6. Miguel?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the work projects on there is redoing the spray pad. And one of the comments there, and I talked to Brett on and off a couple times, is that there's new state requirements for the water. But what was interesting, in the paper the other day, there was an article about the city of Rockland. They're building the spray pad at Springview Park. And originally, they were going to have a recirculation system that recirculated the water, purified it, and then reused it. And when the bids came in, that added about $420,000 to their project. So they decided not to do that. And what they're using, and I talked to the Parks and Recreation Director, and they call it a pass-through water system. In other words, the water goes through, goes out. And they didn't see any problem with the state of California. So we just wanted to bring that up, that it would be a lot more advantageous. This system doesn't use very much water. I don't know, I thought Brett was looking at a self-contained filtration system. So that's my comment.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment on item 6? Seeing and hearing none. Council, it's a receive and file. Do we have a motion?
I'll move to receive and file item 6.
Okay, there's a motion.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Item is passed, receive and file. Okay, let's move on to business. Item 11, vaping and electronic cigarette epidemic. Sean, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this item was actually brought forward at the last meeting with discussion from our Mayor Pro Tem, Clark Kretz, and from Councilman Baker on looking at potential ways that the town can help address this vaping and e-cigarette, electronic cigarette epidemic that we have, basically state and nationwide, and if there was anything that the town itself could do. So I'm going to do just a real quick PowerPoint. We have some folks from the Sheriff's Department here. We have some folks from Del Oro High School here as well. There's also some folks from the county's tobacco, is it tobacco reduction? Tobacco control. Thank you. To also speak. So we'll just start this. Talked about where this came from. The recommendation tonight is just to provide direction to the staff. We're not prepared tonight to get anything actually moved forward. I don't have a draft ordinance or anything in front of you, but we do need direction on how you want to move forward. So I think in speaking with the folks at the county and from the Sheriff's Department, there's two choices that we have for the town right now. The first is to ban the sale of all e-cigs, e-cigarettes, and vaping products in town. And then that would include direction to work with the county on different ordinances, including establishing an ordinance for youth in possession, which would then send those youth in possession of a vaping device to a diversion program that's already been established by the county. And then also include direction to prepare a no smoking ordinance in our parks. We actually don't have that. I'm kind of surprised we don't have that, but we definitely need to do that. The other option would be to direct staff to prepare a resolution recommending residents just stop vaping because of the significant health hazards that activity brings with it. I don't have a specific recommendation to you in the staff report or in the PowerPoint, but as we go through this, I think that you'll see that my recommendation is going to be to bring back the actual ordinances and not just do the resolution. So this is actually from the county. 22.7% of youth in our county use tobacco products, and you can see the numbers though. A third of them are illegal tobacco sales. That's happening within 1,000 feet of a school. 1 in 5 stores near schools sell tobacco products. 85% near schools sell flavored tobacco products, and then 30% have tobacco ads in kid-friendly areas. In town here, we have 4 shops that sell some sort of tobacco products. So we have Woody's that sells cigarettes and the e-cig stuff. We have Stone Tree that sells cigarettes and the e-cig stuff. We have Tobacco Republic, which is the cigar place. And then we also have the Shell Station down on Taylor Road. So Shell Station is pretty close to Del Oro. The Woody's is not super close to Del Oro, but there is a lot of traffic that goes through there. Kids going to school.
Sean, when you say illegal tobacco sales, or where that slide says illegal tobacco sales, does that mean just people underage buying tobacco, not black market tobacco?
No. Under 18 sales.
Right.
This is from the Truth Initiative, which is a nationwide kind of initiative to help inspire tobacco-free lives in our youth. So 15 to 17-year-olds, and I wish that I could create this kind of cool little slide thing here, but I stole it. So 15 to 17-year-olds are 16% more likely to use a Juul. You could substitute Juul for any kind of e-cig vape, frankly, compared to those ages 25 to 34. And the primary reason for that is because a lot of the advertisements, while they're not specifically aimed, well, I think that they are specifically aimed at youth, they don't come and say, hey, if you're 16 years old, come buy a Juul with your friend. But they are targeted towards youth. And then of the 15 to 17-year-olds who use an e-cig, 56% use it 3 or more days a month, and almost half of it use it 10 days a month. I'm sure the council has seen and the public has seen that we had a recent Del Oro graduate, I think it was a recent graduate, who was hospitalized for a significant lung issue because of a vaping product that he was using. The 2018-2019 Healthy Kids Survey, so this is a statewide survey that's sent out to youth in our schools. It's self-reported, and so because it's self-reported, you have to understand that some people aren't going to report on themselves. But Del Oro specific statistics, 16% have used an e-cig or a vaping device 4 or more times. An anecdotal report from the principal at Del Oro is that 50 to 60% of the kids at Del Oro are using an e-cig of some type, including using it in class or in bathrooms because you can't smell it. It's vaporized and there's no smell to it. And the principal will get up and speak to that. Serious health crisis that we're facing here. Vaping and e-cig use increased 78% among high schoolers between 17 and 18. Teens 16 times more likely to use e-cigs or vaping than those who are 25 to 34 years old. And then they're also 4 times more likely to start smoking if they've vaped. The idea originally was that if you vape, you're not going to smoke. And those who do smoke tend to use the e-cigs or vaping to help stop them from smoking. In youth, it's kind of the reverse. And then vaping devices most commonly used is the most commonly used tobacco product in the state. More than 80% of high schoolers who consume tobacco are using a vaping device. When I was in high school, it was kids chewed constantly, right? Like all the high school kids that grew up in the country, and everybody chewed. If I went back to the high school now, I can almost guarantee it's about 50% using some kind of a vape thing, and not that many kids chew. They probably do both, maybe. Del Oro Principal Nauman and Loomis Grammar School District, Gordon Med, have told me that they both support any potential town action to ban e-cig and vaping products in town. And there's two ways to do that. One is to ban the sale of the vaping and e-cig thing completely, which is a step that I think that we should take, but then partnering on top of that and layering another layer, because you got to remember that just because Loomis bans something doesn't mean that you can't drive down the street. If you just go down Taylor Road to where it switches over to Pacific and Rockland, there's a convenience store on the left-hand side that sells Juul. Right, so it doesn't take a whole lot of driving to get one. You can also order them on Amazon, and you just literally have to click a check mark saying that you were 18. There's no, you don't have to enter a driver's license or anything else. And so the companion ordinance that would be really effective is going to be, there's going to be two of them. One would be that ordinance that says if you're under 18, you're caught with a vaping device, you are sent to a diversion program at the county. That would be enforced by our local law enforcement, so that would be enforced by the Sheriff's Department. The other piece would be setting up some sort of a prohibition for tobacco sales in town either within 1,000 feet of a school, or placing a cap on the number that we have in town. Right now we have 4, as I said. If you capped it at 4, then no new tobacco places can come into town. If you do a 1,000-foot radius of any school, 500-foot radius, whatever it is. Auburn just passed an 850-foot radius from schools. That would limit the places where the tobacco can be sold, obviously. The businesses that are within that radius are grandfathered in because they're an existing business. So we're not driving existing businesses out. We're just preventing new from coming in. That's a direction that I'll want council to give me on which way you want to go when we get to that point. The states and the state of California and the feds are also looking at taking some sort of action. So the governor signed an executive order to look at ways to start decreasing this epidemic on the vaping and e-cig thing, and then he's also directed the Department of Public Health to bring back potential actions. And then President Trump's administration is looking to take some sort of action as well. I don't know when those actions are going to happen, and I don't know what they're going to be, but they are looking at something else coming up. So the recommendation, as I said, you got the two choices. The ordinance is to ban, to limit the number, or to put a 1,000-foot radius, and then also the one about if you're under 18 and you're caught with an e-cig, then you go to the diversion program, or doing the resolution recommending residents stop vaping due to the significant health hazards. Frankly, I think that it's a significant enough issue that the town should actually take some sort of an action rather than just passing that resolution. And I can answer questions if you have them.
I have a question. I've been asking about this since that came up at our meeting. I heard that the kids that are smoking this, that have had the lung issues, are vaping a product that's not
THC related.
It's not coming out of the medical marijuana. They're getting this liquid marijuana that's got something in it that's not supposed to be ingested. So is that part of the problem? Is the sale of that illegal?
Yeah, the illegal thing, it's illegal already, so it's not like passing an ordinance is going to prevent that. But what can happen is so Juul is a specific kind. You can only buy a Juul pod for it.
Yeah.
But there's other kinds that you can buy at a convenience store that you can refill with.
Well, there's stores that do nothing but sell vaping products, and there's one in Rockland.
Right.
So getting it is not a problem for anybody. But I just had questions on, is that a true fact that the illegal, the stuff that the kids are doing, I think is that marijuana that they buy that's not out of the medical store.
Right. That's my understanding.
If you have a medical card, so that's the difference. If you buy it with the medicinal marijuana card, it's safer than what you buy on the street. It's got something that's causes the lung
I think that one of the issues, though, also, and we don't have, the tobacco folks from the county can probably speak better to this than I can, but one of the issues is that, like, the Juul product, any of the e-cig products they're not really regulated by FDA, and so it's hard to determine how much nicotine is actually in them. I saw another stat that the amount of nicotine in these type of products has increased by like, I don't know, 16% or 17% over the past 2 years. So the nicotine content is going higher, which then creates the addiction that kids have to the product in the first place.
Yeah, because I've been told that you can buy the products to put in there that lower the tobacco so that you can wean off of cigarettes by using that, but that's all I don't really know much about it, but that's what I've learned.
I would like to hear from the county tobacco people. It looked like she had a comment for us. And then also I would like to hear about the diversion program, and also specifically from Del Oro, to see what kind of a problem that they're having and how we can facilitate and help them. They might be really influential in helping us shape what we do. So.
Okay, at this time, anybody else from council want to make comments, questions? Okay.
So why don't we bring up the county folks, and they can speak to the questions that the council had about that, and then we'll have Del Oro come up.
Okay, come on up. Be sure to use that microphone. Name and address, please.
Name and address. So I'm Alex Ride, and 5934 Blackstone Drive, Rockland. I just wanted to answer a couple of questions in regards to the vaping illness, just to help understand that a little bit more. We keep ourselves very up to date. We sit on a lot of calls about it. The big thing is like they don't know what product is causing the issue. So like 78% say yes, they're using THC, but they're also using nicotine products. And then there's 70% that say I've never used a THC product and we're only using nicotine. So there's a lot of misconception, because there were several news articles that came out and it was like, it was the vitamin E acetate, or it was this and this, and there's no backing behind that. So the big thing is like we still don't know. We're still doing all the studies to try to figure that out. So hopefully that clears up some questions with that.
I do have a question. So the element that is in the vape, the tobacco product, is that an oil, or is that what is that?
So e-cigarettes are a little bit complex. So the e-cigarette, if we break it down, is the device itself. So that's the battery-powered operated thing that you put the liquid into. The e-juice is that liquid, and it's the one that contains the oily substances. So typically it contains propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, flavoring, sometimes coloring, and then nicotine most of the time. I would say over 90% of the time it has nicotine in it. Since they're not regulated by the FDA, they don't have to tell us how much nicotine is in it, truthfully. But so the oily substance is like the entire thing. So we actually just had to clean the e-juice that we have in our office to display for parents. So when we go and give presentations to help them, and all of it is just completely oily, and it's just the e-juice is just oily.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments from council?
Brian had specific questions. Did you get those answered?
Yeah, no, it was answered, because it's, I've spent a lot of time on airplanes recently and had a lot of time to read articles about it, and it seems like it's an all-encompassing and not necessarily specific. You know, I know the THC stuff. I'd like to hear from the Sheriff's Department what they're hearing, especially at the high school level, with that involvement, and how we can, you know, cut down on that. But yeah, my questions were answered. I wanted to know also how the diversion program works, and is that through you guys also?
Yeah, so we're the ones that helped Auburn with coming up with like the whole process. So basically what that would entail would be depending on how Loomis would want to go about it, Auburn is doing it on a Saturday where they would have a student and parent portion, and so the students would have to come with a parent, and they would end up in this diversion class, which would talk about why they use, what's in the products, break down coping strategies to deal with cravings, and so on, to help really dive in and give them the skills to help quit to quit also, but also to let them know, like, here's X, Y, and Z, what's in the product, so that you understand. Because most of the time, let's be honest, most of us don't know what's in it, and so helping them understand that. I'm not sure exactly, Auburn's is to, if they don't attend the class, that's when they get a fine, but if they come attend the class, then they don't get a fine, and it's totally waived and everything. And it's all administered by us?
No.
No?
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add it's an administrative fine, so it's not criminal at all.
What's the amount of the fine?
I believe theirs is 100 in Auburn.
So
There's no criminal record or anything? It's just
No, it's not criminal at all.
Yeah.
We're trying to mimic what a lot of schools are moving towards. Instead of suspending students, they have them attend an educational intervention-based class to help with that instead of sending them home to do the same thing.
So step one sends them to that class and say a month later there's another offense. How does this move forward in the process?
That is a good question. We haven't worked fully that out. We will be doing pre and post testing with everyone in the course. So potentially they may end up in the course a couple of times, and hopefully maybe they won't. Hopefully the first time we'll get them, but honestly, this is the first throughout the entire state that's ever been done, and even the first within many states within our nation.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, so we have a sheriff deputy. Is it Deputy Barnhart? Are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, I think Councilmember Baker has a question for you.
All right.
Welcome.
What are you guys seeing at the high school level as far as is it THC related products, is it tobacco related products, or is it hard to tell at this point?
It's both, and I'll just introduce myself real quick. I'm the lieutenant at our Horseshoe Bar station, and with me tonight is Sergeant Jason Davis. He's in charge of our Youth and Community Services unit, and under him is all of our school resource officers. So he's going to speak to some of the details about what they're seeing in the schools, but it's a combination of both is the reality. And what the e-cigarettes do is allow kids to burn honey oil, which is a concentrated form of cannabis. So not only are they ingesting tobacco, but also it allows them to smoke this marijuana product. So I'll introduce Jason to speak to some of the details about what we're doing.
Thank you, Lieutenant, Mayor, City Council members. So hearing from our school resource officers, vaping is a huge issue on school campuses, and the state of California, as you know, abolished the law that made possession of tobacco by a minor unlawful. So it's no longer unlawful for a minor to possess tobacco. So you can have an 8-year-old kid walking down the street with a cigarette, there's nothing we can do. So with that, our school resource officers' hands are tied a lot of times. They have the education code and it falls back on the schools. But vaping is a major problem on our school campuses without fail. I have a senior that goes to Del Oro, and she tells me all the time, Dad, they're vaping in class. They just, vape, and then they'll blow the smoke into their backpacks, and the teacher doesn't know it. So they're human too. They're a genius in that way, and so that stuff is going on in our school campuses. So with that being said, I can go into the things that we're doing to combat it. We've just applied for a state grant, which is a $100,000 grant, which looks like we're going to get it. I just sent it off for approval through our chain of command. It's going to go over to the Board of Soups for their signature, and then we're going to send it back to the state, and hopefully we get this grant, which will allow us to do undercover decoy operations throughout the county, including the city of Loomis. Basically, we use underage minors, and they stand out in front of a store, similar to our alcohol beverage control operations, and they attempt to get people to buy tobacco products for them, or they go into the stores themselves and attempt to purchase tobacco products. The way the laws are written now, the only thing we can do, is hold those that are buying the tobacco products for the kids accountable, because it is still illegal to furbish or sell to a minor. So the business owners or salespeople can be held responsible in that sense as well. In this grant, we also have education, which allows us to get into the schools, also allows us to requires us to educate business owners. So we will host educational seminars at selected sites and invite the business owners or business community to come and be educated on the tobacco laws. With that, we also have a JAG grant where we reallocated $100,000 for education and equipment within the schools. Lieutenant Barnhart and I met with Jeff Tucker last week, and he had a brilliant idea. He said, let's get a committee of students the leadership committee and of students and tell us where we should put this equipment, because they're going to know better than we do. So those are the things that we're doing to combat this issue. It is a very serious problem in our community, and I think it's something that needs to be addressed. I mean, we've already covered the stats that I had. Also, the APD, or Auburn, has kind of already passed their ordinance, so the first in the county to do so. We're working on trying to get an ordinance passed. Obviously, that's not our role as the sheriff's office. It's kind of a conflict for us to write laws and then enforce laws. So we're working with the Placer County Tobacco Control Program. They have students or young people that come in and present the case to the Board of Supes and do that legwork to get these, ordinances enacted. Again, our primary focus is education. So, as opposed to criminal penalties initially, we offer our hope is that we offer the education piece and get the kids educated and then go from there. Maybe a Saturday, in tobacco school will deter future criminal behavior, but also holding the parents responsible as well.
So currently, when somebody is caught like at Del Oro with a vaping pen, how are they dealt with? Or how does that process
through the school,
go?
the school administration, yeah. So through suspension and things of that nature, school discipline at this level, at this time.
Okay, any other questions, comments?
Yeah.
Okay, I think she's coming up next. Okay, thank you, Jason.
Excellent. The Eggplant Festival was a hit. Good job.
Okay, I think we have Principal Chelsea Nauman.
Yes.
Hi there.
Hi, thank you.
Like the jacket.
Thanks. I was out at water polo right before this. I got a little chilly. And yes, we are out of power tomorrow at Del Oro, just FYI. So they confirmed that in an email, so we're very excited, but we're still going to have school. So thank you for having me this evening, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions with regard to our vaping problem. As the statistics show, it is certainly an issue. It's something we deal with every day, and we've gone rather from trying to catch kids to we need to prevent. It is so hard to detect. I just came out of the AP world there for 3 years and stepped into the role as principal, and it seemed like we were chasing our tails constantly. Kids blow it into their jacket, they blow it into their backpacks. It's in the restroom because the way it smells, you can't detect it. It smells fruity, it smells like bath and body spray. So it's getting to the point where teachers are guessing, is it the student or is it a vape? And then the challenge as well of determining, is it THC or is it tobacco? So we have test kits now. We use test kits when when kids come up and we test to see if it's THC or tobacco. With the concern with the statistics, I think it's more relevant to hear what our students have to say. And one thing about teenagers is they're pretty honest when they're in trouble, for the most part, when they get to that point. And so rather than this approach of throwing the hammer and the legal aspect of it, it's just asking kids, why are you doing this? And I've been in administration this is my 10th year. And until recently, when kids were using, say, chewing tobacco or cigarettes, I've never had them tell me, I am physically addicted. I cannot stop. To the point of I'm having to do it in class, I'm having to do it when I wake up, I'm having to do it when I go to bed. And I can't ever recall having a student tell me that about a cigarette or chewing tobacco, which is scary as an adult to say you're 14 years old and addicted to a nicotine product. And asking them why are you using a vape pen instead of cigarettes? Well, cigarettes are gross. They taste bad. They smell bad. And people can notice that. It's noticed by educators when a student smokes tobacco in comparison to this fruity scented product that tastes good. And so they just get extremely addicted and it doesn't taste bad to them. And then there's the issue of they don't see anything wrong with it. There is that lack of knowledge. What does this look like long term? And they'll tell you, well, there's nothing, it's less harmful than actual cigarettes. It doesn't cause lung cancer. We haven't shown that yet. So in their minds, they're thinking they're using this new product that tastes good, it's healthier, and what's the harm? So we're really in prevention mode at this point. And I would say, in all honesty, daily, if not multiple times weekly, we have kids up for vaping, and that's just on campus. That 50 to 60% that I gave came from our student board member. In a conversation with him, I said, if you had to project how many kids, he said, well, we know the kids that use it on campus, but he said off campus, Mrs. Nauman, it's out of control. Another piece that we're seeing with the THC component is the level of THC and the honey oil and how the adolescents' brains are reacting to it. It's been very sad to see students go into states of depression all the way up to states of psychosis, to where we've had to restrain students because, again, it's this new epidemic of we don't know how their brains are reacting to the high concentration of THC. So I'm happy to answer any more questions you might have.
So currently when you have somebody vaping, obviously there's parent involvement in that process. What is the parents, how have they reacted to the situation?
They typically don't know what the vape looks like. And they don't know. Or if they do know, it's, I'm trying to get them to stop. I don't know how to get them to stop. If you looked at an actual Juul or a vape pen, it looks like a flash drive, a USB. And they seem to change every week. So I'm not sure who is the marketing guru for vape products, but we get new product, it seems like weekly, in terms of how students are vaping or the liquid vape that they're using, or whether it be THC concentration. So it's really, really hard, I guess, to catch. So that's where we've kind of circled our wagons as a district and said we need to prevent, because the catching is just not helping.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Would that program the county has started and Auburn has instituted, would that help at Del Oro?
The diversion program?
Yeah, the diversion program.
Any county program can help.
So
we
you would like to have some kind of a program like that at Del Oro?
We have the student assistance program right now, which is a county program that we assign students to for multiple violations rather than the suspension route, just to try to get them that help. And then we also have a restore program as well, where the parent attends with the student. So we're always interested in outside resources, outside support that we can get to help prevent this.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate that. I was thinking about all the different technologies and how fast technology is changing, and obviously these vape pens are moving along right with that. I've heard that there are watches now that they can vape on, and so you know the job of figuring out who's doing it is becoming harder and harder. So thank you again for coming and telling us what's going on at Del Oro.
Anytime, and we certainly appreciate the community support by all means. Thank you.
I just have a comment that it just makes me sick that the tobacco company, Juul or whatever, can be allowed to, obviously with the sweet flavored, the candy, cotton candy, that they're targeting children and the youth, and there should be a bigger law, above our realm passed, but I think we can do all that we can do right here at the local level. So I'm all for supporting the ban.
Chelsea, what do you do with the product or the actual Juul item when you bring a student in? Do you confiscate it and you take it away and throw it away?
No, we have a very large drawer full, and we'll pull it out at staff meetings, just so our staff is aware of what we're seeing and what it looks like.
Okay.
And we've also done it for some parent nights as well.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, comments for Chelsea? Okay.
I have a question for staff.
Okay.
We have an ordinance probably 10 years ago, give or take, about medicinal marijuana shops not being allowed in Loomis. Can we add like a vape shop to that same ordinance by just adding medical marijuana and just adjust that ordinance that we have?
We need to bring that ordinance back. It's actually coming back next month.
Oh, okay.
To council, because the emergency ordinance that we passed is expiring soon. I wouldn't want to have the vaping thing put on top of it. I think that it's better to have them be discreet, so that way.
Okay.
Because if anything ever changes, and I don't know if this would ever change, but if something ever changed, and all of a sudden we had to change a heart on marijuana or on vaping, you'd have to undo both and then pass another one to.
Well, I just thought since we had one, it might be easy to just adjust it by adding a vape shop, but maybe we need to just so that we don't get that business coming to town if we have it
Well, that's
on the
a
books, like
concern.
like we have the medical marijuana shop is not allowed in town.
Right.
And then maybe we just need then the component for the vaping shop.
Yeah, it's a concern
Not
because
to the
right-
ones that are selling it, that's something different, but I mean, just a whole, I mean, I'm talking about like a store that's just like Rockland has one, that's just a
Yeah.
vape shop.
So right now, that's allowed in town, because our zoning code doesn't say that you can't have that. So
Well, that's what
that's why I think it's critical for us to pass the ban of selling it in the first place, because it would prevent that type of, and it would prevent the ban, it would prevent it from being sold anywhere. So.
But I think, I would just like to add that that vape shop to the list of non-preferred or.
Well, we could add it to the zoning code that we don't allow that in town, but if we have a ban on vaping and e-cig sale, it would basically prevent it. You wouldn't be able to bring one in anyway.
Okay.
Okay, let's open it up for public comment, and then council can deliberate on direction to staff. Public comment.
Jenny Nisley, 4135 Hunters Drive. I just wanted to get more understanding what you were talking about with the current businesses that are selling, and because the Tobacco Republic brings a lot of people into our town, so I'm just trying, I got confused with what would happen to, are they selling the vape?
I don't think that Tobacco Republic is. I didn't go in there. It's a little bit weird to be going in and kind of like snooping around. So I pretended like I was going to buy a thing of mints. Like the 6'3" bald guy going in. So I don't think that Tobacco Republic sells the Juul or the e-cig stuff. The existing businesses would not be prohibited from selling cigarettes or selling tobacco that they have. They would be prohibited from selling the vaping products or the e-cig stuff, if that's the direction that council went on banning the sale of those products in town.
Okay.
And also, if I may, just kind of piggyback on Rhonda, what she was saying, if we tap the amount of people that can, or the amount of businesses that you can actually sell at 4, it actually would then say to all 4 of those people that they can't have any other competition that comes in. So in a sense, it's a bit of a help in a silver lining, so to speak. You see what I mean?
Well, and they could go out of business, and that would open up a slot for someone else to.
Well, you didn't mention Rayleigh's. Doesn't Rayleigh's sell tobacco?
No, they stopped.
They stopped selling tobacco. Oh, okay.
Okay, public comment.
Linda Kelly. I think it'd be really important to educate parents, because a lot of these kids are doing this without them even knowing it. And the younger, the better. I've got grandkids that are junior high, even in grade school, where they won't go in the bathroom anymore, and because it's full of people vaping, little kids. And so one school where my sister-in-law lives had the parents actually come in, and they did a whole assembly talking to them about what it is and what to look for, and where they can buy it, where these kids are buying it without them knowing it, and just kind of educated them. I think, because I didn't know anything about this till last year, and I'm just going, how did I not know this, But my kids are grown, but now it's my grandkids. So just educating the parents to be more aware would really help. And it's an epidemic, it's a problem. Yeah.
Thank you.
Jean Wilson, 4301 Barton Road, and I was wondering if we have the 4 that are currently here, if any of them stopped selling vaping products, if they're selling them now. I was wondering if there's a way that we can prohibit them from starting up again. I don't know. Maybe we can, maybe we can't.
Thank you.
Can I offer a little clarification? I think what Sean is outlining is 2 approaches that are not necessarily exclusive. One would be a prohibition on the sale of a product, and there'd be no grandfathering of that. So a store that is currently selling it would simply be prohibited from doing it. The other would be more the land use approach, I'm not sure that that's really the direction that you want to go to address this particular issue. The land use approach would say, we'll put a line in our zoning matrix that says no stores, no commercial activities selling vaping products. In that circumstance, you would run into a vesting issue where the existing businesses would typically be allowed to continue until they stop doing it. And then you are sort of rewarding them by making the monopolies in town. And history of trying to go that route suggests that it actually entrenches the operation and it never goes away because it's very lucrative for them to be the only ones who are doing that, so.
Sonia Coupler, 5630 Tudor Way, Loomis. I'm just curious, someone had mentioned earlier that you can buy these products on Amazon. So how does that work as far as making these ordinances and not being able to purchase them in town and then so forth?
That's why you kind of need the other side with the education and giving the sheriff's department the ability to send kids who are caught with it to a diversion program. Because not only can you buy it on Amazon, but you can go down the street and buy it. If we ban it here, you go down the street and buy it in Rockland or Roseville, wherever. There's a bunch of places in Sacramento that sell them, at least right now. And so the education piece is that ordinance that would enable sending an underage kid caught with it to a diversion program is the other part to help at least provide the education.
Yeah. What you're saying is it's bigger than Loomis.
Right.
And
100%.
Whatever we decide to do here tonight or next month is not going to stop access.
Right.
It could be a barrier to access, but unless we want to get in a lawsuit with Amazon and the federal government, kids are still going to get it.
Hi, Mike Yukovich, 5911 Great Court, Loomis. Probably on a daily or every other day, I go into Woody or my wife goes into Woody's Market, and they've been selling the Juuls or whatever for 3 or 4 years. And I don't think it's ever been a problem there with sales to minors. I think, this minor one has just come up lately, and I think you bring up a good point. I know they're not buying it at Woody's. I guarantee you that nobody under 18 is buying any liquor, alcohol, or anything at Woody's. They've come in there with the undercover agents, and they've never made a bust on them. So I'm real concerned about where are the youth really getting these. We're targeting the 4 stores that sell Juul. There is potentially some value to the Juul for people that are smokers. There was a study that was supposed to come out yesterday because there's no real authentic studies that was done in Great Britain over a year to find out the value and the negative part of the Juul cigarettes, not the ones with the illegal substance. So somebody that wants to stop smoking, even though the American Cancer Society says, well, just stop, but if you want to puff on something, try the Juul. So there are some benefits to adults. I think you really need to look at stop youth from using them. It's interesting, we're talking about vaping, yet kids be over at the park smoking cigarettes, probably just as bad for them. So there's no diversion program for that. But I would have a real concern about not letting maybe adults be able to buy Juuls. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Other public comment?
Jesse Lunsford, 6133 Smokewood Court. Legally, can we team up, instead of everybody doing it separately, work with Auburn, Colfax? The school district goes all the way from Colfax all the way south. Is there any way we can team up with our surrounding cities, sister cities, and work together and come up with a master plan?
Yes. There's not a way that's a legal mechanism to adopt a regional, for example, a regional ban. You can cooperate similar to the item that you just approved, your second reading on the social host ordinance. That was a common approach that was taken in many jurisdictions in Placer County. Each of the ordinances is a little different, tailored, but you can certainly encourage your staff to work with the staff of other
jurisdictions. You have contact with elected officials in other jurisdictions.
Okay. Public comment.
David Ring, 3486 Del Mar. Just piggybacking on what he said, are we aware that any of the other towns are doing this?
Yeah, so Auburn passed a similar ban, although theirs went even further and banned the sale of flavored tobacco. So they don't allow the sale of flavored tobacco anywhere in town. The one flavor that was carved out of that is menthol, because a lot of folks use menthol cigarettes. The county can probably speak to what you're doing on trying to come up with a regional project process. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Hi, my name is Amy McGrath, and address is 6812 Folsom Oaks Court in Granite Bay. And so just a few things. So first on the Auburn ordinance, so they kind of have like two things going on at one time. So the first ordinance that just passed the second reading is the density aspect, the 1,000 feet from a school, 500 feet from one another. That also includes a $850 tobacco retail license fee, which is going to go towards enforcement of the tobacco retailers and education with the tobacco retailers. And then it also includes their youth possession and kind of diversion class series. And then updating the tobacco definitions to include vaping and everything like that for their existing policies. For example, their smoke-free parks policy. And then a second ordinance that just passed the first reading is the flavor ban, and that carves out mint and menthol cigarettes and chew only. So the menthol and mint e-cigarette products are still included in the ban. They won't be allowed, but that just passed the first reading. So once it passes the second reading, I believe their intent is to start January 1st, 2020. That's when the ordinance that passed the second reading is going into effect. So that's a little information on that. And then I wanted to touch on a couple other things that were said in regards to where youth are really getting these. So they are, whether we want to believe it or not, they are getting them in our stores. I'm not necessarily pointing fingers in Loomis, but Rockland did some youth decoy operations, and 20% of their stores did sell to youth. And then also parents are providing to youth, again, as much as we don't want to believe it. So in my mind, if you get rid of the e-cigarettes available to parents as well, it means that they're not going to have as easy access to provide to their kids. So it's not just about preventing to the youth, because parents can get them a lot more easily than kids can. And then I also wanted to mention that the e-cigarettes are not approved. They're not an approved cessation tool. So while it may work for some people, that's great, but those people are kind of anomalies. The FDA hasn't actually said that they work. They're a lot different from patches and gum and things like that. And then in regards to having kind of like a master plan, having a regional focused attempt, that's very, very rare for a whole county to go all at the same time. We kind of say when one goes, the rest tend to follow. So you saw with Auburn passing, now there's starting to be a lot of motion in other jurisdictions within Placer County, but getting them all to adopt something at the same time is very, very tricky. Things move at very different paces, and then town council versus a city council versus the board of supervisors, everyone kind of works at their own pace. So something that took Auburn a few months might take the board of supervisors a couple years. You know, it's just hard to have that tactical approach as much as we would want it. Are there any questions?
Comments, questions, council?
Okay, thank you.
This is still open for public comment. Public comment? Okay, seeing and hearing none, we'll bring it back to council. It's time to deliberate, if at all. Now, let's stay organized, because there's a lot of moving parts here and a lot of ideas. So let's everybody take notes, and then...
Can we start with like the diversion program and see if we're in favor of, because the principal did say that she would be, would welcome that.
I think that a good way to do it would be to start either, the diversion program would have to be tied to an ordinance, so we would have to pass an ordinance to allow that. So I guess if I could, I mean, we could do like a straw poll of council and say, are you in favor of that? If so, I could bring that back. And we'll just kind of go down the menu list.
Okay. I heard about 12 ideas floated.
Yeah.
And so let's just go down and try to get a consensus on maybe the easier things to agree upon.
We're probably all in favor of the school having the diversion.
Okay. Diversion, we good on that? Do you want to say something, Mr. Duncan?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about, I heard someone say the Auburn plan, they prohibit the sales of the flavored tobaccos, but do they still allow the regular tobacco flavors in the Juul? Or do they have no Juul cigarettes at all?
Yeah, so like, are you referring to like tobacco flavoring?
Right.
Yeah, so that is still allowed. It's basically anything that's not tobacco flavored counts in the ban.
Okay, and they have excluded e-cigarettes at all? I mean, totally, or, okay, all right, you're answering my question.
Okay.
So they are pinpointing on what's targeting towards the youth, like Principal Nauman had mentioned that, oh no, I don't want to smoke a cigarette or regular flavored tobacco. So is that possible that we could do the same thing as Auburn? I mean,
it's possible.
Yeah. That way we're not, cutting into the adult, even though, I mean, some adults give their kids, like some of them give their kids liquor. That's why we just passed the social host ordinance. So it's kind of hard to control what parents do individually, but I think maybe have that into consideration is the tobacco flavored that is targeted toward children. And do you think that Auburn plan is a good plan?
I think our general public health answer would be that we would like to see flavors across the board with no exemption.
Right.
But I think in some jurisdictions you have to take smaller steps. I mean, we're not San Francisco. We can't go huge like they can.
Right.
And so I think it's a really good first step to tackle this issue.
Okay. Thank you.
Jan?
Well, I just wanted to remind everybody, too, that we had a citizen harm their lungs incredibly badly, and he was not a minor. And the problem is this is not an FDA-approved product. So my thought was protecting our citizens in whole, no matter how old you are. Of course, our kids are our number one concern, but everybody's susceptible to being hurt by this product. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, so I do have a couple comments. First of all, I do think the most effective way to curb use is for people to make their own decisions. I mean, we can ban everything that we want, but if we recall back in Prohibition, that didn't do much in curbing use. So what I'm hearing is a lot of concern about youth, and my preference is to focus a lot of our energy on youth and let adults make adult decisions. And if they're poor decisions in our estimation, then we can have that position. But I don't want to be getting into the business of making decisions for adults. That's my preference. I think focusing our attention on the flavored tobaccos, the bubble gums and the grapes that are clearly targeting young people, the way they market those things clearly is directed towards young folks. They use cartoons and clever marketing techniques to get to youth. So that's where my preference is. So having said that, I know there might be some other comments here before we start going down a list of priorities. Councilmember Baker, are you good?
Yeah, I have some comments.
Okay.
I think looking at this problem as a whole, I think part of the problem actually needs to be dealt with on a state and a federal level. And the banning of e-cigarettes within town limits are so small that, I mean, literally while we were sitting here, I went to Amazon and said, let's see what's available. And for under $10, I can have it by Friday. And I don't think it changes anything. I think the problem that we have with it, or at least my problem, is with the youth side of it. I see just a problem in the way that their brains are developing, like we've heard with some of the THC products and some of these flavors that we really truly don't know what's in them. But that all has to be regulated on a federal level. That's an FDA thing. We as a town of Loomis can't regulate those things. But what we can do is give our schools and the sheriff department some teeth to help these kids, whatever that may be. And I think that that will be part of the discussion tonight. But I don't know that banning e-cigarettes in town would actually move the needle at all. But providing tools through grants or whatever to the sheriff's department to do sting operations and to help with this diversion program, I think would be the most effective tool that we have available to us.
Okay.
I agree with what Brian just said. I would like to go more towards the youth and helping the schools, and not just the high school, but the grammar school as well, because I know it's probably not happening in the lower grades, but I'm sure it's happening in the junior high groups. So I think we just need to start with the diversion program and getting it in both the grammar and the high school somehow. You know, if Gordon Med's in favor of that, I don't see him here this evening, so but I think that's where we need to start.
Council, do we have a consensus on the diversion program issue? Are we good? Yeah. Okay, so, all right.
So bring back an ordinance that allows for citation, administrative citation of youth caught with a vaping or e-cig device, really any tobacco device, that allows for the diversion process.
Okay. Right? All right.
Okay.
Youth is defined as
Under 18.
Under 18.
I would also like to see the smoke-free parks. I don't think that that's a place for things like that to be happening.
Tobacco-free parks?
Tobacco-free, drug-free. I mean, those should be free of all of those things. Alcohol-free. The other thing, huh?
Don't take all our stuff away.
You can do it at home. It's good.
Well, like the Eggplant Festival, there is alcohol with that. So, I mean, and that's in our park too. So if we start,
I think we would have to work with our attorney on the proper language to allow for town events that are here to furnish that. Also, with the diversion program, I do think ultimately we need to work very closely with Placer County Tobacco on that diversion program and how that works. I think eventually, as time goes on, if we find that parents are furnishing these things, that there needs to be some form of non-criminal citation for them also that they have to deal with. And if it involves community service for the youth, cleaning up parks or things like that. I mean, I just think that we need to work with Placer County very closely to help structure that program so that Auburn can use it, we can use it, but it actually has a form of diversion as opposed to I show up to class once, I get busted again in a couple weeks, I have to go to class again, and every now and again I lose a Saturday. Eventually there has to be some form of real punishment. I don't want to see people going to jail or criminal records or things like that, but we also need to understand that this is very serious. I spent, a couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go hang out with some professional football players, and it was amazing to me. Those guys are on a regiment, they're on all of these things, and all of them are vaping. There was half of them sitting there vaping, and it was like, you've got to be kidding me. So I do think that the education process we need to start earlier with it, and we need to do more with our parents so that our parents understand what is actually out there and what is hurting our kids. So.
Okay, so I got smoke-free, tobacco-free park ordinance.
Okay.
All right, council, are we on the same page there? Okay, Rhonda?
Tobacco.
Tobacco-free?
Vaping, yeah.
Okay.
And we'll have to figure out the component for right here when there's.
Well,
do you want to, so.
There's still no, we didn't say alcohol, we just said the tobacco.
Yeah, I mean, but if we're gonna go that far to do that in our parks, we have other parks throughout town, you know.
Well, so the tobacco-free park ordinances, there's ordinances all over the place that we can.
Perfect.
Right. If you want to include alcohol, I need to know from council, do you want to include alcohol or do you only want it to be tobacco?
I'd like to keep, personally, I'd like to keep this narrow and this conversation targeted towards tobacco.
Yeah.
You know, you see a sign going into a park and it's gonna say tobacco-free, alcohol-free, drug-free, you know, just like when we go into a school campus, you know, there's a sign out there for all kinds of things that you can't bring onto a school campus, and I think that our parks should be the same. You know, I coach soccer, and I actually had to have a group of kids leave because 30 feet from where my kids are practicing, they were sitting there smoking weed. And I had to walk over there, and, you know, the sheriff's department, I called them out, and they just basically run them off, but there's nothing they can do.
Right.
And so we need to give them the ability to actually do something.
Right.
I thought that alcohol was prohibited from the parks already. I mean, like Sunrise Loomis, isn't it? I mean,
We would have to, there's a sign, but it's,
nobody pays
attention to it. But I don't know if it's in that ordinance or not, but we need to have that ability to give them the ability to enforce things.
The smoke-free park would include any kind of smoking, anything, I would imagine. I'll work with the town attorney to figure out how to ban smoking in general in parks, whether it's vaping, tobacco, marijuana, whatever. The alcohol one, I need to know, because I'm confused on if you want to do that or not. Because I hear Councilmember Baker talking about, banning alcohol in the parks as well, but I don't know.
That brings up the point that when we have events at LDB and their Oktoberfest and all the things that go on near there, that would create a conflict.
Well, we would have to have something in there to deal with that, whether it's a permit for the event or whatever it is.
So what has to happen when you have alcohol at events like that on a public property? You have to go to the ABC and you have to get a day license to serve the alcohol. So.
Okay, so Jeff, would that be in line with an ordinance that banned that?
Yes. So you could have an ordinance that prohibits possession and consumption of alcohol except where there's an ABC license issued specifically for an event. I mean, I don't know the exact wording yet, but we can.
I'm assuming that that's a typical thing. It's not like that we would be the only city in the state that has something like that.
There are some communities that ban alcohol in public parks.
Yes, right. But, I mean, in parks, though. Yeah. Right. So what's council's pleasure on the alcohol portion of that?
As long as it doesn't affect any events, even weddings or whatever that people might have.
So as long as there's an ABC license tied to the alcohol use, ban it in parks other than that.
Yeah, I'm not supportive of alcohol being, consumed at a park if it's not, an event or something that's pre-registered. So what I'd like to know is, so are you saying we don't have a no drinking ordinance on the books at parks right now?
As far as I know.
Let's look into that. I mean,
I can look into it and see, but if not, we can bring it back.
I'd really like to. My preference is to keep those conversations
Cricket
separate.
Said she's pretty sure that we don't.
And let's come back to that. I mean, if that is a problem and people are consuming alcohol at T-ball events, then let's take that up.
You can ask the sheriff's department.
Is that happening?
The local homeless guys hanging out right here getting drunk in the park. I get parents calling me all the time about it.
Cricket's looking at our ordinances right now to see, so as we're talking. So let's
let's
come
keep
back
going
to
down
that
that.
one.
So far we have a consensus on a smoke-free park ordinance, diversion program.
So the next one that I have.
Start there with those two items, and
We can do a resolution, as in like a public informational item. That seems like an easy one. Let's come back to that.
So we do have an ordinance that prevents alcohol selling in our parks.
Do we have an agenda issue with that?
And an ordinance prohibiting alcohol consumption or sale unless you have the proper license through ABC, basically.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
we're already covered.
We're already covered with that.
So that's a legit question, but in the context of what's on the agenda, directing staff to return at a future date to present something to council, the mayor brings up a valid point, is that this is agendized as smoking and tobacco, not about alcohol.
Well, we already have the ordinance.
It's already in place.
Okay, great. All right, so how about a resolution, essentially a public service announcement, encouraging people to look into this and educate themselves?
Yeah, I don't want to tell people they can't do it when they're adults.
It's a suggestion.
I don't mind a public service kind of recommendation, but I don't want to tell somebody that they can't vape, that's an adult that knows what they want. I mean, if we want to tell them to go ahead and look into, is it really healthy what you're doing, or is it something
I don't think the
you wanna
resolution would do that. It wouldn't
mind
go
a
that far.
resolution, but I don't want to get into adult regulation of vaping.
Neither do I. But that's not what the resolution would do.
No,
The
okay.
resolution would be a public information piece, right?
Yeah.
It
I'm
would
fine
be
with
it
that.
would be to encourage people to the effect,
To educate
look into it,
themselves.
right?
Yeah.
Do we have consent on that?
Yes. I mean, well, as far as the resolution, then we're going to come back to the banning.
Yep. Okay, resolution.
No, we're going to, for youth.
I would also like to suggest a letter of recommendation for the sheriff's educational grant. If the town could write, or I'd be happy to do that if the council is in consensus, to write a letter of recommendation in support of the sheriff's grant attempt. Would that help? No?
Yes, we're receiving a grant anyway. It's called the JAG grant.
Oh, okay. I thought you were pursuing it.
We are confident that we'll be receiving it.
Okay.
And what that will allow us to do is to go into the schools and start the education process.
Geez, that was easy. All right. Okay. Let's get to, we talked about vape shops and future vape shops. Do we have a consensus on that? Do we want to just do a complete ban on future vape shops?
I would like to see a vape shop in our town.
Okay, that's one. Two.
Is that to not see one?
Not any new vape shops?
Oh, well, yeah, we don't have any actual
But
vape shops.
there could be a potential.
What I was talking about is, I don't want to see a shop that's just, like there in Rockland, there's a shop that you can walk in and it's just every flavor in the world, every kind of vaping tool, everything. It's a whole store on just vaping products.
Yep.
I want to ban that type of
Okay,
of
Brian,
business.
where are you on that?
That's fine.
Okay.
I mean, as long as we're not affecting.
It would be the same as having a medical marijuana shop. We don't want that in our town, and this would be.
It's different though, because
Well,
if you have somebody that opens up a vape shop and then they also have a rack of cigarettes, then it's not.
Right, those are the issues that you're going to get into.
So you have to define
People are
what a vape shop is?
Yeah, are you talking about where sales are limited exclusively to vape products.
That's what I was
That's pretty
talking
easy to
about.
get around that by adding a small section of
okay.
snacks or a small section of
Well,
cigarettes.
then I don't-
Well,
And then you're into, is
I
it
guess
90%, 80%, 50%?
Let's see what other cities have done with banning vape shops, all right?
Okay, but the idea
There has to be a
is something that's focused on vaping, not tobacco.
How do we get away with it on a medical marijuana?
That's different.
It's a
That's
product.
just a whole different
It's a
thing,
specific
Because
product.
they sell snacks.
Because what you're doing.
They sell cannabis.
Because
Those cookies are different.
what you're doing with marijuana.
No, but I mean, we didn't have any problem passing that in town, so.
No, I think it's a valid point to make the distinction. You don't have a ban on a land use category of retail, right? You have a ban on the sale of marijuana. So
I thought that said we would prohibit a medical marijuana.
Your prohibition is on the sale of
Of the
medical
substance.
marijuana. Okay.
So what I was proposing is
I
a
always-
ban on the sale of the substance, which is the vaping and e-cig
Okay.
product. That's, I don't know how you would be able to prevent, like Jeff said, if a store wanted to open up in the Loomis News Building tomorrow that is a vape shop, if we had this ordinance in place, if it was a vape shop that had a rack of potato chips, I don't think you could prevent that from coming in unless
well,
you ban.
I mean, it's just very complicated. There are approaches that are
whatever we have
taken
to
in zoning contexts where you try to focus on what the predominant use of the property is or the primary use, and you may have standards that are based on square footage that's devoted to the sale of certain products. So,
Well, then I
you
would
say
like
not
to see
more than,
us not let any other shops come into town to sell those type of products.
The other way to do that would be to address the flavored portion of it.
Okay.
And so you could do.
That's coming up next. Let's get to that. So we'll come back to no vape shop because we might be able to resolve that when we discuss flavored products. So,
There's a new flavor every month, I'm sure.
well,
How do you?
all flavors.
Well, you'd
all
say
flavors
any
other than
flavor
menthol.
that's not- right.
So let's hear it.
I would be totally in favor of banning all flavored tobacco products here in Loomis, just like Auburn did.
Okay, I'm supportive of
Except the
that.
menthol ones, right?
Except the menthol and chew and all that.
Carve out menthol and, okay, I'm supportive of that.
Mint and
Menthol and mint. Okay, there's. Yes, Duncan. Okay, we have a consensus on that, Sean.
I will just say, I don't believe that moves the needle at all.
Yeah, probably not.
Like, at all.
And I agree with you, but we can't just not do anything, Brian.
I know, but look we see this on a federal level and we see it on a state level. We pass legislation that makes us feel good, but it actually doesn't do anything. And so I want to do something. I want to, if we're going to pass legislation, we're going to pass things, let's actually have it be able to move the needle and to have an effect in our community. I mean, you look right here. Banning it in town isn't going to change the access. That's the unfortunate part of it. Unless I think that actually has to be dealt with on a state or a federal level. I don't know that even Auburn banning it didn't move the needle. They just go and order it online, or they go from Auburn to North Auburn and they buy it because that's not in the city limits, or they go wherever it is that they work. I mean, it didn't change anything. They're still purchasing the product. So the only thing that we can do is actually, like, they're adults, so they're buying it. You know, I mean, we did it with, they tried to do it with alcohol. They've tried to do it with so many different things. And when you're an adult, you have freedom of choice. I mean, this is the country that we're built on. But before you're 18, you're not an adult. So that's where I think we need to focus. I think that's where we have the actual ability to make something. But by banning it here in town, just like Auburn banned it, doesn't move the needle. That has to be done on a state or a federal level. That's a larger, all-encompassing than us. I mean, you drive 2 minutes from here and you're no longer in town limits. I don't think it changes anything.
The thing is, if you're, people mention Woody's, there's kids walking by, at least you're taking it out of the hands of the younger ones. Yeah, older kids can buy it for them, adults can buy it for them. In Texas, they have dry counties. People drive, 40 miles across the county line. They drive drunk sometimes, yeah, but it is a speed bump. It is a slow deterrent to it. So, I mean, if it's, to me, it's criminal just the thought of a corporation, targeting children with flavored, I mean, the principal said, like, the kids, oh, why don't you smoke tobacco or a cigarette? And
I'm 100% with you on that. Like, literally 100%. But the problem, what I'm saying is the problem is bigger than us. And so if right now we ban it here in town, it didn't change anything. We still have the same problem. And I think on a state level, on a federal level, they need to be targeting those corporations that are targeting our kids. That's 100%. And I believe that legislation is coming. But as far as what we can do and actually have an effect on, I don't think it changes anything.
It could be just a small effect.
I think that's the unfortunate part of the conversation. Yeah. I really do.
But
and it's not that I'm wanting to stand up for these corporations.
No.
What I'm saying is I don't believe it does anything because of the size of our footprint and because of our actual jurisdiction and what they have access to online. Most of these kids have Amazon accounts that their parents don't. Their parents give them a credit card, so they have an Amazon account. So I just look at it as they will 100% have the same access that they had before, unfortunately. So that's why we have to do things that target their use, their ability to have, things like that. Because once we can get them into something where they're losing Saturdays, losing money, losing things like that, I think that's where we can actually have a meaningful effect on somebody. But just banning it in town, sure, we could ban it and we could all feel good, but we're going to walk out of here and nothing changes, unfortunately.
I just want to mention, when you're saying feel good, it's not, I didn't bring this up to make me feel good. What I brought up was the fact that we had a citizen that was injured by a vaping pen, and we have this rampant problem throughout the United States with our children. And while you may think that we aren't making a difference because we're a small town, somebody has to start somewhere. And have you heard of the tipping point? Yeah. You got to just keep on keeping on. When you see something that is hurting people, or you have to make a change, or you can possibly help somebody, I say, by golly, do it. Try and help. And if you have to continue to try, you can't stop.
But what is our sphere of influence?
Ourselves, our citizens.
But our citizens can go 5 minutes from here and get the same thing. So our sphere of influence, what we're talking about, I think we need to write our state and our federal, and I think we need to put very strong emphasis on support for legislation that does this, because that energy towards that hopefully will be the tipping point on that larger scale. But on the small jurisdiction of banning it, I think it's a blip on the radar, and I mean the smallest blip possible.
Okay, well, let's agree to disagree. How about that?
Not a problem.
Okay. All right. Let's hear from others. So right now, what we're talking about is banning flavored tobacco vape cartridges, essentially.
The vape juice.
And for me, it's just about curbing use for youth. All right. The things that are directed and targeted for youth. This isn't about adult use. If adults want to make these decisions, then by all means. I'm supportive of banning flavored tobacco products, exempting menthol and mint.
And is it all tobacco products, or is it only the vape?
Vaping.
Okay.
Yep.
And so there's a consensus for, I believe, right?
It's not unanimous. I think we have a split. So
3-2, maybe.
3-2. Okay, so 3-2 on that item.
Okay. And then the other one was talking about banning e-cig sale and vaping products completely. And I need to know what you want to do with that. The one thing I'll point out with that is, you know, like, I don't know, when I was a kid, we called them head shops, right? You could go in and buy out. So if you allow, if you don't ban the product, the vaping products, you're allowing the pens to be sold, the individual, the batteries, the cartridge stuff. You can't buy the juice here, but you'd be able to buy the actual product that makes the whole thing work, with the exception of the juice stuff.
All right, let's weigh in on that. Banning all vape products.
Well, yeah, I mean, it seems like it would go hand in hand, you know?
What our force,
What did Auburn do about the actual devices?
They didn't address the devices, it was just the flavors.
Okay, so is there a second on that? On banning all vape products, cartridges, and the tools.
Well, I would like to see that myself, but
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Let's do a roll call on that. Is it proper to do a roll call at this
Well, we're
point?
not really,
No.
you're not proving
It's giving
anything.
direction.
It's just giving direction.
So I'm not in favor of that, banning all products. Rhonda, Brian, okay.
Okay, so it's a 2 to 3 to 3 to 2, no.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that was the menu, right? So what I have is bringing back a resolution, public service announcement, bringing in a letter of support, no.
Smoke-free park ordinance.
Smoke-free park ordinance, an ordinance that establishes a diversion program for youth caught with this type of a product. And I'm assuming you would want to include just any kind of tobacco product. You wouldn't want to just limit it to.
Yep.
Okay. And then banning flavored vaping tobacco sales with the exception of menthol or mint. So you're basically banning any flavored cig cartridge or juice that's not menthol or mint flavored.
I would like to add sending a letter of support for legislation to our state and federal as far as regulating that industry. I think that needs to be done statewide by all these agencies, Auburn, all of them should be sending letters of support for regulation as far as figuring out the FDA standards on what these are going to be and the actual effect, because I just think that's bigger than us.
Sure.
Okay, we have concurrence on that.
So what I would do with that is to basically put together some sort of a cover letter and include the town's resolution and send that to our legislators.
one thing doesn't make sense is we're not banning the sale of the jewel or the vape.
The pen itself.
The pen, but we're going to limit the flavors?
Yeah.
So the distinction I have, in my opinion, is that some of these flavors and the marketing is directed towards youth.
Yeah.
And that's really where I want to direct my attention, right?
It just seems
And when you look at some of the
you
marketing,
can buy the pen here, but you can only buy menthol.
well, there's non-flavor too. It's just straight tobacco.
Well, I know, but
So-
I'm just saying, it just seems kind of odd.
So youth is my focus for whatever it accomplishes by doing it in the town,
We've
within the
probably
town.
spent enough time on this now.
Okay, so how are we doing so far, Sean?
Well, I think I got it all.
Have we gone through this? Are there any other items on the table that we want to discuss? Okay. Well, that's quite a few things. All right. With that, I look forward to seeing a follow-up here. All right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Sean. Okay, moving on to...
comment? Public comment?
We already had public comment.
Did we?
Yeah, that was correction of staff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to move on to item 12, League of California Cities Conference Resolutions.
So you have in your packet the resolution packet that the League of California Cities sent out. So there's 2 resolutions that the General Assembly will be taking up. One of them is for calling upon the PUC to expand its Rural 28 program for undergrounding overhead utilities. So each city is provided a certain amount of money each year to underground utilities and to facilitate the undergrounding of utilities. This amendment would include projects in high fire hazard severity zones. And then the second resolution is calls upon the state and federal governments of the U.S. and Mexico to address water quality issues resulting from transboundary flows from Mexico's Tijuana River into the United States. And so what we're looking for is direction to your voting member, who would be Mayor Pro Tem Clark Kretz, on how to vote on those two items, either support or oppose, or support one and oppose the other, or whatever you want to do.
What I found in the past as a voting delegate for the town is you have to listen to the debate, and there'll be a lot of debating on there, and you get insight into the state, and it might not affect us like the Tijuana River. It's not going to probably affect Northern California, but I don't know how to tell her to vote for that until you hear what all the delegates have to say, because this is the state of California that we're voting for. It's not just our little town. So I think we need to give the voting delegate and let her
the authority to make the decision.
Because she's the one that's going to be hearing the debates. And if we trust, we've trusted her to be our delegate, we need to trust her to make the right decision, because it's a state, it's a state. These are things that,
the other thing that I'll point out too is that a lot of times amendments are made during the actual conference.
Yeah, and it's going to change.
Right. Or new ones can come up that through a petition process. So generally, the other cities that I've been to, they do exactly what you just said, that they give the voting delegate the authority to make the decision that
that's how we've always done it in the past here also.
Okay, any other comment? Yeah, I concur with Rhonda. Okay. You good?
You're in charge, Jan,
Okay.
and you can check with Jeff, your delegate, your alternate, and have him help you.
All right, let's open it up for public comment.
Oh, here we go.
Hi, Mike Ugovich, 5911 Great Court. This would be the ideal time for Mr. Baker's idea. I totally agree with you that it needs to be more than just the town of Loomis. It may be too late for this year, but not too late for next year, to send a letter in asking for a resolution, basically outlining your points on vaping, and make that a resolution of the League of California Cities.
We're okay.
Yeah, because we can do that, as anybody can add a resolution, and that's a good one to add.
You could do that.
So when we're down there, we can maybe check into.
The process for it is pretty lengthy. You have to do a petition and or you can also the resolution, the PSA resolution that we'll be doing, we could forward that to the league and ask the league to look at this as part of their legislative agenda, or to bring it forward at the next conference as well.
Well, I think you can bring it to a committee.
Yeah, right.
That does this, so maybe if we can get that done before next week when we go.
If Jan runs around and gets 10% of the cities to sign that you want it on right now, it'll go on right now.
Okay. Any other public comment? Seeing and hearing none, we'll bring it back to council. Okay. I think we're good there.
Yep.
Moving on, item 13, referendum, the village properties status. This is an item that we directed staff to work on so that we could better understand what can go there now and what the use is.
Okay. Good evening. This is an item that the council asked the staff to come forward with. So we worked with Mary Beth in taking a look at the status of these properties. The Village at Loomis approval occurred in January of this year on the 8th, and it approved, certified the Village at Loomis environmental impact report. The town council adopted the mitigation monitoring program, adopted the land use diagram modifications to the general plan, adopted the zoning map modifications, adopted the plan development for the site, and also approved the development agreement. June 18th, 2019, there was a special election, and the referendum actions invalidated the plan development approval, invalidated the zoning map amendments, and invalidated the villages at Loomis development agreement. Town approvals that were not changed with the referendum include the certification of the villages at Loomis EIR, what's not listed on there, but the mitigation monitoring program, the general plan land use designation modifications, and general plan table 3.1. So you have some of the things that remained in effect from the approvals and some things that went away with the referendum. Total acreage is 68.29 acres. We saw some different numbers as we went through the final EIR, the resolutions, and other documents, but now with the parcels in GIS, we have a real number here. So these 68.29 acres. There are 23 sites. Now what we did was you have a number of parcels with assessor's parcels numbers, and those parcels are divided by the land use designations. And so we divided those up with parcel site numbers so that we could identify what was allowed, not allowed on those sites. So this is a graphic, and you received one, I hope, at a fairly large level, of the various parcels and their identification. So basically, if a assessor's parcel number, i.e. Parcel 1, then we divided that parcel into 1A, 1B, 1C to identify where the land use designation was different on that parcel. Sites retaining historic land use designations. So some of the land use designations were not changed by the council action. And so Site 3, Town Center, Site 4A, 5A, 7, 9A, 11, and 12 retain the original land use designations that were designated on those prior to you taking action on the villages. And this graphic highlights those parcels that did not change, and they're in the hashed area, so that you can see there's a fair number of parcels that did not change with.
Oh, they don't.
You know, it's really hard to show up on this.
It's the pink and the blue, and the dark brown.
Okay.
Oh, it's quite a bit.
There is. And there's some hash up in here also. So let me.
No, it's down here. There's hash. Went too high up.
I'm sorry. I want to be clear. I'm sorry. The hash areas are where land use designations changed. The unhashed areas, land use designations did not change with the approval of the villages. So there is zoning consistent with land use designation. So out of the 68 acres, 45.75 acres have existing zoning that is consistent with the general plan land use designations. And with those designations, there's various approvals required. So zoning clearance, design review. And typically this is done at the planning director level, but your code does provide some provisions where the council may look at some of those choices. Minor use permit, again, often this is done at the planning director level, but again, your code has some instances where the planning commission will make those choices. And then a use permit is a planning commission decision. Also, because the EIR remains certified, projects in this area can tier from that EIR. One of the things, though, becomes a little difficult is that EIR had a project description with a number of improvements, such as roads and other things that were part of the project and not mitigation. So as a project comes in, the staff is going to have to evaluate it, how consistent it is with the EIR, how consistent it is with the projects that were anticipated to be built under that EIR. And there may be a requirement then for supplemental environmental documentation if those things differ. One thing about an EIR, especially an EIR as comprehensive as this one was, is you have to take a look at it as an umbrella over these properties, and that if the project is consistent and does not create any new significant impacts, that project can use that document without further environmental documentation. If the project comes in and has a significant impact that goes outside the umbrella, then you are required to evaluate that impact only, either with a supplemental environmental document or some focus document, but you only have to look at that one item. So, for instance, you have information on biological resources, you have information on cultural resources, and those things are probably not going to change with any one of the projects.
How long is that document good for?
All right.
So, this is, I don't know how much time you want to spend on the environmental process. This will be very complicated when a development project comes forward. As Andrews says, you have a certified EIR. I believe it was a project level document. So normally you would not need any subsequent review except in the circumstances Andrews says, where you come in, you do the analysis to say, has anything substantially changed? Either there are significant impacts that weren't previously identified, or the project itself has changed in some significant way. Because portions of the project were struck down, and the development agreement and some of the zoning, it will need to be a very project by project specific determination. My best guess is there will be a need for some supplemental environmental review in order to address those issues that are not, where the project that's proposed isn't going to be doing everything that was described in the original EIR. There's no deadline for when an EIR is good. EIRs are valid until they're not. I mean, they're valid until enough things have changed that there is a need for some supplemental review. So it's not so much that an EIR per se gets stale. It's just over time, circumstances change to the point where it makes it more and more likely that you'll need to do additional environmental review.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. There are 14 sites that have zoning consistent with the general plan, and those sites are listed here. They're generally town center sites, residential high density, and residential medium high density sites that are consistent. And again here, and I want to confirm. So the consistent parcels on this graphic, again, are the ones that are shaded. And taking a look at this, and unfortunately, let me take a look here. So zoning consistent, as all of these parcels are consistent. 10A is not consistent. The open space is consistent because open space is consistent with any zone within the town. And then these parcels are consistent with the general plan and the zoning. Parcels that are not consistent with the general plan, there's 22.54 acres that are not, and there are 8 sites that if a project moves forward, a rezoning would be required on those to be consistent with the general plan. And again, this is from the standpoint of the general plan is the town's constitution, and it's mandatory that zoning be consistent with your general plan. So that's the reason for that discussion. And there are 8 sites, and again, primarily they are the residential medium and residential medium high density sites that would require rezoning in order for a project to proceed forward on those sites. We created a summary table. Honestly, when I looked at all the documents, you know, the EIR was yay thick, and all the documents trying to figure out what's going on, I go to tables in order to figure it out. So What we did is we created a site number for each of these sites. The assessor's parcel number is listed, the number of acres in that site, the square feet in the site, what the existing general plan designation is, the units per acre allowed for that designation, the maximum coverage allowed for that general plan designation, the existing zoning, and then a column, is the zoning consistent with the general plan or not, yes or no. Then the required process that would take place if a project came in on those parcels. And then we listed also what are compatible zones for that general plan designation, so you have an idea of zones that would be compatible. And then we have the units per acre for those compatible zones, the maximum coverage, the minimum lot size, and then notes. One of the things today we talked about RENA, and parcel 10B was intended to be your housing parcel. Let me go back to, and it's this parcel right here. That's designated in your housing element. That's what housing community development was referring to as a use by right for affordable housing. And that still exists, and people can come in and process that. So that's horrible to read, but we have 3 sheets of those tables that I believe are up online, and you can print those out, preferably at 11 by 17, in order to read all of that information. But it will tell you site by site what's allowed and what can move forward. The 2 pink sites are sites owned by somebody other than the applicant that came in on the villages, and I believe those are owned by the church, and they are irrevocably dedicated to the town of Loomis. Mm-hmm. So we just highlighted those as those were different ownership.
That's what they've been.
Yeah. So that's where we are. You know, what are the choices? One is do nothing and see what happens as people come in. And review the projects as they come in, and as Jeff said, it will be a complex review process. Nothing is a slam dunk other than possibly a low-income housing project or an affordable housing project, which can come in by use by right, as you have put together in your housing ordinance or your housing element. One thing that we're suggesting in your general plan update is that you take a look at these parcels and determine what the appropriate use is for the parcels, and then of course what is the appropriate zoning for those parcels. So there's a number of things and actions you could take in the future on this. One of the questions you might have is just how many units can be allowed. That is so hard to calculate, even though you have densities allowed. One of the issues is what are the site requirements, how much is removed for various infrastructure, roads, parks, whatever that are required under this project. The other is between the zoning code and the general plan, there's a lot of subtleties that take place in determining how many units are allowed on a site, and so it really has to be done based on a project proposed for the site that we'll be able to determine what you can actually do on that site.
Okay. Comments, questions from council?
Okay, I have one question.
Of course.
So where there is a conflict between general plan and zoning consistency, the required process, you say rezone.
Correct.
So is that the only?
No, the other potential process would be you come in and you change the land use designation. But it one way or the other, your zoning by state law has to be consistent with your general plan. This is your general plan today, but you could go back and say we're going to change the general plan designation and at the same time change the zoning designation to be consistent. So that's another option. But other than that, today with your general plan, you have to rezone in order to be able to develop on that site.
Okay, thank you.
Andy, there's several, I'm looking at like the column where it says our general plan and zoning consistent, and there's several that say yes. And so what's to stop someone from coming to town and just targeting those properties that are already consistent.
Nothing. They could come in tomorrow.
And they could do what? It's a desk review? Is it an administrative review? They just go to the planning commission?
Really, it depends on what they're proposing to do. Your commercial uses in your zone and your general plan allow some uses, allow not others. So it really depends on, you'd have to look at both of those and make a determination of if what is allowed. So, yeah, there's a number of cases where that is the case.
Well,
there's, with the possible exception of the high density, there's very little in Loomis that can be built without some kind of a trip to the planning commission, or at least the zoning administrator approving a minor use permit.
Correct.
There's several here. If you look at page 3, and that's a lot of acreage, that are yes, 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 and you're talking over
48? Is it 48?
Yeah, so 9A, 9B, 10B, and 10C are all consistent. And
Correct.
so is 10E. So ostensibly, somebody could just come in and say, I want to put this, this, and this there, and we haven't stopped any development.
Correct.
Well, I do want to make the point that on the residential areas, there would almost certainly need to be a map.
Yes.
Which would be, it's not as, the town does not have the same level of discretion it had in approving general plan changes and rezones, but it is still a discretionary entitlement. There would be a public process, there would be a secret determination as to what was needed.
Correct.
So there would be a
Granted by what level of?
A subdivision map would be.
Subdivision map is a full review,
Okay.
and it requires CEQA evaluation.
And planning commission.
And a planning commission approval, yeah.
But some of the properties that are in this category are, for example, commercial. So if that commercial was a single building on a parcel, that would be a much more limited review typically. If it is consistent with the planning, consistent with the zoning, and a single building that didn't require a map, maybe a use permit.
Yeah.
Could they use the EIR that has been certified?
That's where it gets complicated, maybe. Let me say yes, in the sense that, as Andrew's indicated, there's a fair amount of the analysis in that document which will probably not change.
Correct.
Where we will be looking again are traffic, anything that required mitigation, particularly off-site mitigation measures that were bundled together in the village project, and that was part of the reason why there was a development agreement, was to make sure that the developer was obligated to build improvements that were far geographically distant from any one of these parcels. So that's the parts that will be a little more complicated when we get to it.
Well, the other thing is the project description included improvements that we would use a term, the project was self-mitigating, so it was not a mitigation measure, but it was part of the project description. That's in the EIR. So if a project comes in, especially for roads that were proposed as part of the project, and if those roads are not being built, then that part of the EIR is probably not going to be appropriate. So pieces will be, I think traffic and transportation would be absolutely one section that probably would require recirculation of a portion of that.
Almost certainly, I think.
And I just wanted to add that all new construction, commercial, anything, ends up at Planning Commission, even under design review. So.
That was what I was alluding to when I said there's almost nothing that can happen in Loomis without a trip to the planning commission.
Council, any other questions, comments at this time?
I just wanted to look at what the presentation that we had from earlier today about, adding the 20% of affordable housing, and that is not reflected in any of this.
No. So, no, it is not. The other thing we note in some of the notes, your ordinance providing for high-density housing assumed Lot 10B would be where it goes, but there are other parcels that that housing could go on, so somebody could come in and claim that it is complying with your housing element and also your housing code. So there are other sites that potentially could be developed, but 10B was the one intended to be your affordable housing site.
9B would be a...
So like in general commercial where it allows stores on the bottom and multifamily above?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you, that was a lot of work.
Yeah, thank you for putting that
My
together.
head was spinning trying to get, let me tell you. Your ordinances and codes are not the most clear. I mean, there was an example today where somebody wanted to know what was the coverage for a residential lot. Well, the general plan table says 35%, but there's a footnote. Go to the text, and it said 50%. And then you go to the zoning, and it's 40%.
That's by design.
And so,
Make sure you fill out one of those forms when you're, the general plan. That's an idea of where we can make some changes.
exactly. So.
Okay, let's open it up for public comment. Public comment?
Oh, thank you. Miguel Yukovich, 5911 Great Court. My real concern is that if you recall when the villages was set up, they did a PD, a plan development, which changed basically the size of the roads, setbacks, park sizes, a variety of things. Now there is no PD, and my contention is you have to revert back to what the zoning ordinance says as far as lot size, setbacks, street sizes. Also in the general plan, it specifies, if you read one sentence, which apparently we're picking sentences out, that all parks will be a minimum of 2.3 acres. And in the PD zone, we had these little tenth of an acre, quarter of an acre, things of this nature that really didn't meet the need. So I have a real concern about this statement that there's a conflict between the general plan and zoning, and they're two different animals. General plan has its specific rules in land use. Zoning has its specific rules in land use. And it was pointed out that one place it said there was a certain lot coverage, let's say, the general plan it said 60%, and in the zoning ordinance it said 45%. In my understanding and reading through some legal documents, zoning is the one that determines the coverage on lots. Even though the general plan may have said 65, it's not the role of the general plan. So I have a real concern of differentiating what the role of the general plan is and what the role of the zoning ordinance is. And the assurance that the standards that the town has had for streets, sidewalks, et cetera, are followed.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Mr. Mayor, if I could just to be clear, it's actually there's a black letter law in California. The general plan controls over the zoning code. Now, you can adopt a zoning code that imposes further restrictions if they're not inconsistent with the general plan. But for example, if the general plan said lot coverage is 45%, the zoning code could not say 60%. That's pretty black and white.
Okay. Thank you.
Jesse Lunsford, 6133 Smokewood Court. Two things. The ERR depends on Doc Barnes going through in order to mitigate traffic, and it's also an evacuation path for our city. I don't see why anyone would be allowed to build without that first being discussed or put forward. If Doc Barnes isn't there, what are the traffic patterns and how is the evacuation of town going to be handled?
We're not, and I don't think Andrews was intending, neither am I. We're not prejudging anything. We're saying, in fact, traffic is something that would be looked at again when a project came forward, because there's a number of improvements that were part of the village project, which we'll have to look at and see how they play out with any particular development.
So the existing EIR would not have to be redone? You could do so supplemental to...
We're really speculating.
Okay.
We need to see what...
I'm fine. Yeah.
If somebody comes in with a 15-unit subdivision,
yeah,
maybe there's a minimal additional environment. If they come in with a 500-unit subdivision, there's probably a lot of redoing that'll have to be done, so
Thank you.
it really depends.
And I was confused. Did you say 10B could be moved? What was designated as our regional housing, high density, could be moved to a different parcel?
The overlay for the high-density regional housing, I'm sorry. The overlay for the high-density regional housing actually covered all of parcel 10, and therefore it was intended to be on 10B, but other locations in parcel 10, because of the way that was placed, could in fact have high-density housing.
Right. Will it still be restricted to the 6.6 acres? It was originally designated as 10B?
The housing element talks about the 129 units and the 6.6 acres, so if it's on 10B or 10 another one, you're still going to be limited to the 6.6 acres.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other public comment? Seeing and hearing none, we'll bring it back to council. This is an informational item, so unless there's any other questions or comments, we'll receive and file this. Seeing and hearing none, thank you guys, appreciate it. Okay, let's move on to council committee reports. Let's start down at Councilmember Duncan's chair, if anything.
Yes. Okay. So yesterday, Pioneer Electric Company, we passed a rate increase. The board unanimously agreed to raise rates 5% higher relative to your entire energy bill, as opposed to the 7% higher as adopted on August 5th. So the adopted rates of August 5th has been rescinded, and the difference will be for a residential consumer using 700 kilowatt hours a month will be $8.07 as opposed to the $11.20 under the rates adopted August 5th. So it's a $3 difference in the rate. Okay, let's see. It's been a long night, so if you have any other questions, talk to me after. Thank you.
Yes, on September 18th, I attended the Placer County Economic Development Board's Business Retention and Expansion Project. It was a great presentation made by Christopher Thornburg, and he is an economist that was hired to focus on Placer County and I-80 from actually Reno all the way to the Bay Area, and of course specifically our area. And I would encourage everybody, business owners, citizens, to go onto the website and listen to his presentation. It was excellent, brief overview of our national, state, and county economy and highlights of Placer County, and talked about what a wonderful place that we have to live in, and it's a great place to work, but we do have challenges, and he does discuss those in great detail. And then let's see, I attended the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. They were celebrating the 65 opening of the interchange getting bigger, and that was a really great marvel that they've been able to do. And other than that, I have nothing else to report.
Thank you, Jan. I think we've got a healthy diet of RENA and SACOG update today, so I'm going to pass it along. Rhonda, you good?
Yeah, the flood board was canceled.
Okay.
No water.
Excellent. Okay. Any other matters of interest for items not on the agenda to council, staff? Anything?
I wanted to update everybody on the power shutoff thing. I got word from PG&E at 8 o'clock that power is going to get shut off. Well, I don't know exactly where in terms of, but if you were on the list, your power is going to be shut off tomorrow, to be prepared for it to be off for about potentially up to 5 days following the end of the wind event, because they have to go through and make sure that all the power lines are still okay. On Placer County, so this is coming from Placer County. Gold Country Fairgrounds will serve as the location of one of PG&E's customer resource centers. So that's up in Auburn. It's open from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. The County Board of Supervisors proclaimed a local emergency today during their regularly scheduled meeting. That provides the opportunity, that's a county-wide state of emergency, so it provides the opportunity, if a state of emergency is declared at the state or federal level, to also to have some funding come through. And the county has activated its EOC, Emergency Operations Center, from Monday up through Friday. So.
Okay, well.
I'm putting stuff on Facebook and trying to put it through to the community post as well. So folks, if folks can get on their phone at least and not kill their battery while they're trying to do it. If I have any new updates, I'll post it. There's a conference call I'll be on tomorrow at 9 a.m. and then there's another one at 5 p.m. That's a countywide call. So I'll get information out as soon as I can, and I'll try to get it to council as well somehow.
Charge your phones tonight, folks.
No, they're not doing it here. The only one is up in Auburn. So if you've got some sort of a medical device that needs power to operate, they've got charging stations up at the fairgrounds up to 6 o'clock. And then after that, I believe that the county is working with those kind of at-risk populations to figure out other places they can go to, keep them safe. So.
Well, PG&E just keeps getting more popular and popular every day, don't they? Jenny? Yeah, sure.
So would that mean that the town, will it be closed if you're out of power? And will you still do the dump day if there's no power? I'm going to ask the question.
The town hall will be closed. If there's no power at town hall, there's no reason for us to be there. We can't answer the phones anymore because they're power. So town hall will be closed.
If it's still off on Saturday, then the dump day will not happen?
Yeah.
Okay. They're just going to ask us.
Okay, with that, meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
I was going to ask about schools, shelters.
Yeah, schools, my understanding, the last time that I talked to the school to Gordon Med from the school and to Chelsea, is that the schools will be in session, at least for tomorrow, even if there's no power, because they can operate for one day. If it goes past one day and they don't have power on Thursday or Friday, they'll close.